Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
Miranda Bracker turned down the street into the yard of her house and was immediately sent sideways in horror. A huge black Jeep was coming at her down the narrow driveway, diesel fuel blistering unbearably. Another second, and the woman would have been under its wheels, but she managed to dodge and jump the curb. A bald-faced gay face in dark glasses sat behind the wheel of the car. This jump seemed to cheer him up a lot. He laughed happily, pointing his passenger's hand somewhere in the direction of Miranda, and a couple of times on cue, apparently to humiliate the old woman. Scare the old woman, Miranda thought. Stop. What old woman? You can't think of yourself like that, or you'll turn around before you can turn into a hunchbacked, ungroomed hockey stick, barely able to move your feet. Just a woman of venerable age, and she's a mirror of herself. Bracker really didn't look like an old woman. A slender, short, older woman. She'd only retired 3 years ago and had taken great care of herself. Covering up her gray hair, did discreet makeup, kept her back straight, wore hats and elegant suits always, even if, like today, she was just going grocery shopping. She was firmly convinced that a woman must look dignified in any situation, and all her life she had built her entire demeanor on that conviction. A hasty jump on the curb did not fit into her model of dignified behavior. Therefore, the episode with the Jeep made Miranda quite angry, plus from the sudden movement. A dull pain appeared in her right side, and her heart rolled like crazy. The woman decided to take a little break on a bench in the backyard backdrop and catch her breath before heading up to her apartment, inevitably approaching the policy. However, Bracker grumbled to himself. God gave new neighbors, one worse than the other. That thug in the Jeep had just moved in, and already he was a nuisance. What kind of house was it? What kind of house? The house Miranda lived in most of her life was really not bad. It was considered high-end in its day. High ceilings, well-designed apartments, quiet entrances, just a couple of apartments per floor, a wide courtyard with a paratrooper and a children's corner. And all this is a stone's throw from the city center, but at a distance from the noisy thoroughfares, all the conditions for a decent life. The house was under the jurisdiction of the Ministry of Education, and the apartment in it was allocated exclusively to the institute workers. And not easy. Prominent scientists, professors, honored worker of science, academician. Miranda herself, although she was a candidate of philological sciences, would hardly have managed to get into this branch of scientific Olympus. But her husband was head of the physics department. He made a certain discovery, significant for the Soviet industry, and for this he was awarded an apartment in an elite house. All her life, Bracker was proud of her residence and her surroundings. But in the last few years, pride has been slowly replaced by irritation and regret. After the collapse of the Union, the population of the house began to renew itself rapidly. Researchers were selling their apartments. Some moved to simpler housing, expecting the difference between the sale and purchase to provide a decent life for themselves in retirement. Some went to the suburbs, deciding to spend their old age in nature, away from the hustle and bustle of the city. Some of the neighbors died, and the apartments were sold by their heirs, to whom it was simply unprofitable to maintain such expensive housing. Oh, those heirs. Their behavior invariably upset Bracker. They sold off the old and even antique furniture from the apartments for next to nothing. They sacked the books that their parents and grandparents had collected all their lives. They piled up by the dumpsters reproductions of paintings and porcelain sets, calling it all unnecessary junk. And these are the descendants of educated, intelligent people who received not the worst education and upbringing. Miranda refused to believe it. Year after year, gradually the house was filled with nouveau riche in turnover, with chips chipped their capitals. At the beginning of perestroika, on the sale of everything that people were willing to buy. A couple of apartments were occupied by obvious gangsters. Take this guy in a Jeep, constantly blocking their iron monsters. The approach to the square. Smells like diesel all over the yard. There's a strange-looking girl in the next doorway. She's some new businessman's keeper. Several times a week she invited guests and threw parties, after which boxes of empty bottles were brought out of the entrance. The parties were invariably accompanied by loud music and dancing. The noise from the girl's open windows could be heard all over the yard. Bracker wondered with horror how the neighbors across the wall and downstairs tolerated it. But the worst of all, of course, was the lady who lived on the same lot with Miranda. "Good morning." Cindy Bracker lowered herself onto the bench where her neighbor, practically the last of the old guard of tenants, was already sitting. Kind Miranda responded, "I see you miraculously avoided being involved in a traffic accident. Did you see that? You have to admit, it's unbearable." The women had some fun washing the new tenant's bones for a while. Miranda learned that the fifth apartment had recently been moved into by another businessman. And that upset her, because it meant that the house was in for another round of renovations. Noise of speakers, dust around the entrance from construction materials, shouting workers and other inconveniences. Then smoothly moved to a discussion of prices and assortment in the nearest stores. They agreed that there was no worthy tea to be found nowadays, and meat was being charged at a completely obscene price. Cindy mentioned that she was going to go shopping at the wholesale store the other day, and Bracker ordered her a box of frozen hams. Miranda herself, traveling like that was beyond her capabilities, and taking the shopping on public transportation was awful, heavy, and uncomfortable. But Cindy and her husband had a car, and they had no trouble. Taking a breath, Bracker was about to go home, but then her companion nodded toward the yard and said mockingly, "Look, our blessed ethics are coming." Miranda turned her head and barely managed to restrain herself from making a disgruntled grimace at her new neighbor in the middle of the yard. Kelly, from Bracker's point of view, was the very old woman Miranda was so afraid of turning into. Complete with a former face slit with deep wrinkles and large, ungroomed hands covered in pigment stains. A trial of subterfuge. She moved leisurely, shifting her feet heavily. Her hair, once dewy, it was abundant with gray to cover the gray that her neighbor refused. She twisted her braid into an old plait at the back of her head, wore an Olympic dress from the nearest clothing market, and heavy square-toed shoes. With her, she always carried a bulky turbo bag that could hold anything, from a water bottle to wool socks to pills for any ailment. But there was something else. Miranda's annoyance was much stronger than her appearance. Kelly was an orderly. She told Bracker, in her ingenuous way, when she came to meet her the day after she moved in. "I can do anything," said the neighbor, smiling, a little embarrassed. "I can give injections and give drips. I learned while I was working at the hospital. Clara is my grandmother. She was my mom. She always told me to go and study. You'll become a doctor or at least a nurse." "What about you?" Miranda asked. I wrinkled my nose at the word mom. "Where can I go?" Waved his hand interlocutor. "First, the children were small. Then my husband got sick. He was very ill. I had to take care of him. And then she got sick. I was proving her. And then the age where after 40 to study. So I've been nursing all my life. Now I'm retired." Such a neighborhood. Miranda, accustomed to the circle of scientists, professors, and academicians, couldn't bear it. For her, it was the strongest blow to her self-esteem. It was also depressing that Kelly's apartment had not been purchased by her sons. New businessmen rose just on the resale of clothing and industrial goods. Bracker disliked and even despised peddlers. And if these peddlers also regularly visited her mother herself, or accompanied by wives and grandchildren, it was all the more offensive. The only daughter, Miranda, whom the woman brought up in the best traditions of scientific intelligentsia, who put her heart and soul into it. She ran away from home at 18, married some construction worker. She'd rarely seen her mother since then. Bracker sometimes talked to Christina on the phone and knew that she had finished accounting courses and had set up a firm with her single husband. She made repairs to the newly rich and counted the profits, looked for clients, and was very proud of her business. But Christina did not want to communicate with her mother or help her with money. recognized that some nurse managed to raise children more successfully than she did. Miranda herself, a candidate of science, a specialist with higher education, was unpleasant, so she reduced communication with her neighbor to a minimum, never visited her, despite frequent invitations. She spoke to the woman coldly and almost condescendingly, never letting her pass the threshold. If Kelly tried to visit her, Bissett was not supportive, and unless it was necessary to discuss a business matter, quickly turned the meeting and left. Kelly, however, in a friend did not particularly achieve. With all the residents of the house, she communicated smoothly and friendly, maintaining good neighborly relations with Dubrovskaya. She politely greeted at meetings, interchange a couple of duty phrases about the weather and well-being. Sometimes she bragged about a new book, bought, as Miranda suspected, at the station's tray. The neighbor adored ladies' novels and soft-colored covers, and every time fervently recommended them to others with phrases, "So interesting everything is like in life." Bracker turned away from this delight. A couple of times she expressed to her neighbor her opinion about such literature. Lissa took offense, but stopped bragging about books. In principle, if we kept communication to a minimum, the nurse's neighborhood could be survived, if it were not for one thing. Kelly was a crazy Friday from Bracker's point of view. She didn't have a single cat living in her apartment, thank God, but she was actively feeding all the yard and street fleas. Twice a day, she brought them a pot of her own cooked porridge. In addition, she bought her charges some pills and drops, dragged them to the vet, treated sick cats, arranging them a hospital at home, delivered babies, and put in good hands kittens. Cindy once asked her how much money her neighbor spent on the cats and dumps each month, and when she found out the amount, she called her blessed. It turned out that the nurse spent more than half of her pension on her hobby. Twice a week, Kelly gave her charges fish days and cooked them porridge. With mine, the nasty fishy smell filled the entire entryway and concentrated as much as possible on the landing where Miranda lived. It seeped under the apartment door and seemed to spread all over the apartment, all the rooms. Bracker, it made her sick. She tried several times to talk to her neighbor about it, but hadn't succeeded. "Why are you doing these culinary experiments?" she asked indignantly. "Feed your tail something. There's ready-made food now. Why are you freaking out, Kelly?" I looked into it. These foods can be harmful to cats, especially street cats. They get used to it, and then they won't eat regular food. And not forever. If something happens to me, the animals will have to fend for themselves. They won't find food anywhere. They'll starve to death. No, Miranda, I can't take that risk. I'm feeding it according to the vet's recommendations. Well, at least replace it with some other fish. I was ready to give up. It stinks to high heaven. What else was Kelly surprised about? It's the cheapest. I take pollock, of course, but it's more expensive with my pension. I can't afford it for this many animals. That was usually the end of the conversation. Twice a week, Bracker suffered from the intrusive smell, and all the other days she tried to run into her neighbor less often, so as not to spoil her mood. And so today she didn't return from her encounter. The nasty attendant was acting out across the yard in the direction of the neighbors, carrying the gray, shaggy cat in her arms. Her witches were sprinkled about her. "Good afternoon, Kelly." Cindy said hello. "What have you got there?" "Good afternoon." The nurse said hello. "It's Grandma Bede. I'm taking her home. Today we'll pray and clean up her hair, and tomorrow we'll go to the vet. It's time for her to be sterilized when she grows up." "Sterilize her? Why?" Cindy was surprised. "Well, otherwise she breeds kittens, and then where to put them? Not to drown them. It's better this way. And a stylized one is easier to put down," Kelly said reasonably. "Makes sense." Suddenly, Miranda, "All we need is a bunch of kittens in our yard." "That's what I think," nodded Miranda. "You're all right. What do you look like?" "You don't look well. You're all yellow." Bracker resented the manners of pointing out the appearance of the person she was talking to. What do you expect from an uneducated nurse? The goose cat curled up in the woman's arms and she hurried away. Come on, we'll have a good day. Yes, Miranda. Do you stop by if you need anything? I've got some good bile stasis pills. Imported. The neighbor disappeared into the entrance. Cindy looked at her friend and grinned. Look, she didn't like the ethics as you answered to your greed. Our blessed one. To hint at something, you need to have at least a minimum of intelligence, Miranda said sternly. To sense your interlocutor, to anticipate his reactions. Kelly, it's unavailable. Just talking nonsense. And Bracker went home. There was still a tugging in her right side. Maybe it really is biliary. I should get a checkup. Have a checkup. Miranda had not looked at the polyclinic for a long time, believing that only old men and women go to doctors. But the pains in Baku were becoming more and more intrusive, and she decided to go right next week. And I'll go, she thought. In the morning, the smell of boiled my Thursday fish day crept from under the door. Miranda remembered with distaste. The woman looked at the clock, 6 o'clock, and the blissful nurse was already up, and she's keeping her awake too. She closed the bedroom door tightly, but the intrusive odor didn't go away. She had to get out of bed and start a new day. The whole apartment seemed to smell of fish, shampoos, toothpaste, freshly brewed coffee, and an orange muffin bought yesterday at the bakery next door. Bracker opened the window to air out the kitchen, but immediately got a handful of sand in her face. It was a windy day. The air was swirling. The dust lifted from the sidewalks instantly rushed into the apartment and sat on the windowsill and tables. Miranda slammed the frame shut irritably. Better an odor than a kitchen full of sand, she reasoned. No fun at all. I'm off to breakfast. Miranda decided to call her daughter. The last time she had spoken to Christina was over a month ago. Her daughter had never called her, and catching her on the phone was a problem. Most of the time, when the Brackers called her home, Christina was either at work or resting afterward. But Mom, she resented Miranda when she complained about her infrequent contacts. I leave for work at 8 o'clock, and I get there late in the evening, and I don't have time to talk. I'm on the phone all day with clients as it is. It's a business, you know. You can't let it get away from you. Miranda understood, although she was a little surprised that even on weekends she couldn't get her daughter on the phone. It was usually the son-in-law or the grandchildren and son-in-law who answered the phone. The woman did not like to talk, believing that the builder of the department apprentice as an interlocutor does not correspond to her. With grandchildren, on the contrary, was not averse to chat, but the boys didn't want to talk to their grandmother. Mom, no. I'll tell them you called while they were talking fast. They'd hang up. Christina never tried calling before work. She usually woke up around 9 o'clock, when her daughter had already left the office. But since she had to wake up earlier today, why not try it? Miranda resolutely motioned her phone to her and dialed the number. Hello, came the joyful voice of her daughter in the receiver. It hasn't been 2 years, Miranda thought. Hello, Christina, daughter. Hello, Mom. It's you. The voice became surprised and a little angry. What are you doing up so early? I just woke up and thought I'd call you before you went to work. I haven't heard from you in a while. I woke up at 700. My daughter was obviously surprised. Why all of a sudden? It's not like you've already gotten senile insomnia. That's a little early. Christina giggled. Miranda frowned. She couldn't stand any hint of her age. Actually, you caught me on the doorstep, didn't you? Christina continued. I'm already running away. Christina, but wait, at least 5 minutes. Bracker was indignant. It's been over a month since we last spoke. I don't know at all how you're doing, if you're all right as boys. How can you do that? But Mom angrily stretched out her daughter. Everything's fine. We don't have any special news. Rick and I are all up and running. It's the season, summer. Everyone's doing repairs, and we're helping them as much as we can for a modest fee. Christina giggled again. The boys finished the year well. Now they are visiting their mother-in-law. It was the message of the king that kicked Miranda. She had suggested more than once that Christina bring her grandchildren to her on weekends or vacations. The woman thought that it was time to begin to deal with upbringing and education in earnest, so that the boys would grow up something good. Since the parents devote all their time to work, it is logical that the grandmother should do it. But the daughter and son-in-law constantly rejected her suggestions. The boys are still young. I do not want to send them with a sleepover in an unfamiliar environment. They make noise and will disturb the grandmother. Parents themselves want to spend more time with their sons. And then, hello, they're visiting their mother-in-law. And what can the mother-in-law give them? A woman who barely graduated from the chef's college and worked in the factory canteen all her life. "Christina, why didn't you send them to me?" asked Bracker. "I want to see them too. And they won't be any worse off at my place. Come on, when they get here from my mother-in-law's. Pack them up to come visit me." "Mom, the boys are gone for the summer," Christina said angrily. "Mom has a private house near the river, the farm. The boys have a place to walk and something to do. They like it there. She feeds them. She spoils them with goodies. After last summer, not a day went by that they didn't ask their grandmother for a visit. You have an apartment in the center of town. Dust, noise, tight courtyard, and no ecology. But what are you talking about?" Last summer stunned at Miranda's thinking. I mean, they were already there last summer, and I was fed stories and excuses. Wonderful. "Christina, don't you think?" She started out stern, but her daughter interrupted her. "Mom, I gotta get out of here. There's Rick waving his car keys. Call me if you need anything." Christina hung up without waiting for an answer. Bracker listened to the dial tone for a moment and gently lowered the receiver of her phone to the lever. "Is that how it is? They don't give her grandchildren. They cheat her brazenly. Conversations are turned away from her. Her daughter didn't even find it necessary to ask her how she was doing. No health problems. Does she need financial help? That's all I could think of. What about the insomnia joke? What kind of stale hulk grew on her wonderful girl? No, you can't think like that." And Miranda held her own. She just called at the wrong time. Christina was in a hurry, so she didn't have time to ask anything. And she didn't tell her grandchildren so as not to upset her mother. But in fact, if you compare, the private house of her mother-in-law is a much better place for the boys than her city apartment. Bracker diligently chased the bad thoughts away from her, though deep down she realized that a positive attitude wouldn't help. Her daughter was exactly like the Hulk, stale, completely uninterested in her mother, and not seeking to communicate with her at 18. She cut her out of her life, and now answers her calls. Not so much out of politeness as out of misunderstanding. Maybe she should admit it to herself and stop hoping for some kind of communication. Stop humiliating herself by begging for crumbs of attention. But Miranda wasn't ready for that. Her husband had died long ago. The old circle of socialization had disintegrated with her retirement and the change of tenants in the house. Her daughter was the only person close to her, so Bracker could not cut her out of her life and kept looking for all sorts of excuses. The mood was completely ruined. Her right side ached more today than before. And then there was that intrusive smell of my Moscow. Damn it to hell. I should tell that nasty cat all she thinks about her and her pets. Yes, she's ill-mannered, uneducated, unorderly, but she should eventually realize that her brews are interfering with the lives of normal people. Miranda slipped her feet into her elegant house shoes and set off determinedly to her neighbor's house. A choking wave of left-field odor from behind the neighbor's open door nearly mistook Miranda off her feet. Kelly stood on the doorstep in one of her tasteless, multicolored dresses, with her hair tousled behind the top of her head. An apron was tied over the top of the dress for salty or wet. Around her belly, Miranda splayed out her hands at the woman. "What's wrong? There's no face on you. Come and sit down." With a foot in her stubbed slippers, she pushed away from the door a snow-white cat with huge blue eyes and silky and long hair. "Step aside and pass the man," she commanded. Miranda, as belligerent as she was, had a belligerent attitude. "I couldn't help but wonder, Grandma," she interjected. Is that the one you carried yesterday? Yes, the one I carried yesterday, Kelly confirmed, and leaned over and stroked the cat's back affectionately. We washed her yesterday when the witches itched and took her apart. Some of them had to be cut off, but it's no big loss. They'll grow back. And anyway, before the operation, she'll have her belly shaved. I see, Miranda stretched out in surprise, but immediately remembered the purpose of her visit. She tried to straighten her back, but the pain in her side was getting in the way. Her body kept trying to slump to the right. Kelly, what was the point of the bracker? But another jerk of pain on her right side made her wince and bend almost in half. Sit down. The neighbor almost forcefully dragged Miranda, who had given Fish the hallway, and sat her down on the table. For a long time my side pulls. I'll give you a pill now. Cast iron bile. It's very good. Bracker sank down on the seat and tried to object to the pill, but her side howled in a particularly strong way, and the woman slumped ungracefully on her side and lost consciousness. She woke up in the ambulance, lying on an uncomfortable stretcher with an IV stuck in her arm. Kelly's face loomed over her. Be patient, my dear, the nurse said affectionately. Why'd you let your bile go so badly? At our age, it's no joke. Now we'll come to the hospital. There the attack will be taken down, under treatment. Everything will be fine. I'm lying down. Don't worry, I used to work at this hospital. I know everyone there. Miranda suddenly calmed down from the chatter and fell back into oblivion. Miranda, Mommy, wake up. She heard through the sleep there. Ozia, you have to wake up. You can't sleep so long. It's time, my dear. Open your eyes. Mommy thought in surprise, and Ozia was called only by her. The dream was persistent, trying to pull the woman back in, but she overpowered herself and opened her eyes and saw the face of the nasty neighbor in front of her. I think it still smelled like fish. Wake up then, Mommy, joyfully asked the face. What's your point? Miranda said indignantly. Her voice was poorly controlled and her tongue was moving with difficulty, but the indignation was a good engine. She spoke the short phrase almost cleanly. Now you're awake. Kelly laughed contentedly. And you've already opened your eyes for half an hour and fall back into sleep. I've already how not to wake you up. She smiled again. Stay there, Miranda. I'll call the doctor now. What doctor? I was gonna ask, but she didn't have time. Kelly disappeared from sight, and only in the distance there was a soft clang of the door. The woman tried to look around. She was lying on a bed that was soft, quite comfortable, and unaccustomedly high. A needle was stuck in her arm. A transparent tube stretched from it to a nearby drip. Behind the drip, the tube was visible, and behind it another bed. The room itself was bright, surprisingly clean, and slightly cool. Miranda tried to stand up to take a better look around, but there was another soft knock on the door, and she was sternly called out. Where do you think you're going, dear? You're not supposed to get up yet. A middle-aged man in a white robe came to the bed. Let's get acquainted, he said. I'm your attending physician. And you are Miranda, right? How are you feeling? The conversation with the doctor clarified a lot of things. It turned out that Miranda's gallbladder had burst, and she was brought to the hospital by ambulance with acute peritonitis and immediately sent to the operating table. The surgery lasted several hours, as it was complicated, and there were some problems in the process due to Bracker's poor blood clotting. But praise be to the surgeons. It all worked out. Lethality was avoided. Now Miranda will have to spend about a month in the hospital. We'll have to wait for the stitches to heal, for her internal organs to normalize. Plus a couple of tests would be nice. You can't get up for a while, Mason said. You'll have to lie down for about a week or your stitches could come apart. It's not a good idea to turn from side to side, either. Try to take care of yourself. Well, Kelly's watching you. I take it I am. Of course I am. The nurse nodded. You don't want to leave a man completely helpless. I must say you're very lucky, Mason said. We're short-staffed for the whole ward, which is almost 100 beds. There are only 3 nurses and 2 orderlies. The girls are bursting at the seams. Naturally, it is impossible to provide quality care in such conditions, and you'll have a personal nurse. Oh yes, a very good one. I remember the qualifications. Kelly's qualifications from when she worked for us. You'll have the highest level of care. The neighbor behind him blushed slightly and looked down in embarrassment. Miranda thought she would probably prefer the complete absence of a caregiver to the constant presence of this blessed woman. But she didn't have to choose, alas. The ward was a double room. In the second bed lay a young maiden who had gotten here also for peritonitis, only caused by an appendix. Peritonitis was missed. She had been on her feet for almost 12 o'clock. So the girl's post-op condition was no better than Miranda's. She was also forbidden to get up. It was required to follow a strict diet and take medication regularly. Kelly took care of her too. What was annoying about Bracker? Not because she was in any way disadvantaged by this voluntary help. It's just that Miranda couldn't understand the point of all this trouble. Why the nurse was patronizing a girl she didn't know. She was trying to share. She wanted to be good for everyone. The woman decided. The girl called herself Lisa and made friends with her nurse surprisingly easily. She could spend hours talking to her, asking her about her past, sharing her childhood experiences. It's understandable, though. No one visited the girl, and she was obviously bored in the ward. Chatter, a nurse, and some entertainment. Miranda didn't get any visits either, although Kelly informed her that she had told Cindy about her hospitalization and all the neighbors. Bracker secretly hoped that one of them would decide to check on her. But for the first few days, there were no visitors. The woman decided that for the time being, because of her serious condition, they simply did not allow anyone to visit her, and she forbade herself to think about it. It was a shame to realize that of all the old guard of neighbors, nobody cared about her. And the uneducated nurse who had recently moved in, treating her like a little kid. And Kelly did take care of her. Every morning she came to the ward, bringing with her a bag of food suited to her ward's diet. Different meals were prepared for Lisa and for Miranda, which, despite their devotion, identity were still much tastier than the meager hospital kitchen. Kelly Huma willed her charges to help them to the toilet, tidy them up after their sleep, and then began to feed them and fed them literally from a spoon, deftly and carefully, gently coaxing them to eat the whole portion. She managed to treat her patients strictly and affectionately at the same time, and this manner was pleasing to Miranda, but it also pissed her off. A couple of days later, she asked Kelly to tell Cindy to call Christina and tell her everything. The woman hoped that her daughter would rush to the hospital and change the stupid chicken. Kelly's on nursing duty. She had already tried by all means to dissuade the girl from staying in the ward permanently. "It must be hard for you to take care of me," Miranda said in a sympathetic voice. "No way." The nurse waved her away. "There are only 2 patients. It's a resort. That's when I was in charge of the whole ward. That's where I had to run. And with you, I even have time to read a book. But you spend all day here. What about your cats? Did you leave them unattended?" Miranda pretended to be worried. Wouldn't the cats be lost? Kelly smiled. "My sister-in-law moved in, and I gave her all the feeding instructions, and she's been taking care of them since the surgery. We should wait a couple weeks before we put her back on the street. Here's more of your sister-in-law's troubles," Bracker lamented. "You what?" laughed the nurse. "And she, on the contrary, is happy," said, "compared to the constant cleaning in a 2-story house and daily care for 3 grown men. That's my son and my grandchildren. So I have a resort for her." Kelly had an answer for everything. And to Bracker's surprise, she really didn't get bogged down by her situation or try to exploit it. For example, to make friends with her neighbor, to get closer to her. After the obligatory procedures, the caregiver usually took care of a book or started chatting with Lisa. If the latter expressed such a desire to communicate with her ward, she did not impose with inquiries. Apart from the obligatory questions about his well-being, She did not pester him. If it had been a stranger, Miranda would not have been bothered by his presence at all. But it was Kelly, whom Bracker had grown accustomed to disliking over the past year. And so the woman waited daily for her daughter and asked the nurse daily, had Cindy mentioned that Christina had called? She answered in the negative each time, and Bracker thought with regret that she must not have gotten through yet. The morning didn't exactly start on schedule. Miranda had Miranda's and fed her broth to Dryad. Kelly began to make herself comfortable in the chair by the window. Usually the nurse would go to wash the dishes after breakfast. Then she would bring a bucket and a mop and begin to clean up the room. Today the ritual was broken. "I'll wait for the doctor," said the nurse. "Yesterday you took the tests, right? I want to ask how the results, and what prognosis do you hope to find out? How long do you have to deal with me?" Miranda grinned. "Oh, really?" Kelly seemed a little offended. "I just need to know what to look for. Maybe you need some medication to speed up your recovery. Don't worry, if you're not feeling well, I won't bother you. I'll sit quietly. Or you want me to read you a book?" Kelly took out another paperback novel with a brightly colored cover. "Very good author," she said in a pretty voice. "I love reading her so much. She's so easy to read. And it's just like life. Let me ask you something." Miranda reached for the book and began to look at the cover. Out of desperation, a mother of many children gave her daughter to an old oligarch, and after a while the whole family came to visit them. She read the abstract and laughed. "Kelly, so what's it like in life here? Do you know a lot of large families who get contacted by oligarchs? What's the big deal?" Surprised neighbor. "I, for example, my grandfather and grandmother married like that." "Your grandfather was an oligarch," I heard a voice from my bed. "Lisa, wow, were there oligarchs back then?" "But my grandfather was a merchant of the First Guild. By the way, he traded in women's goods. His trading house had in St. Petersburg and a few more stores in the region. He supplied the imperial family with various ladies' trifles, so that in those days he was an oligarch. A merchant, then," Miranda thought. "It must be in the family's blood to be a merchant." "Wow," Lisa marveled. "Tell me about them and your grandmother." "Oh, please, why shouldn't I? He's docile," Kelly agreed. "Miranda, would you mind if we chatted?" "No, not at all," Miranda said politely. She couldn't bear to quarrel with her nurse and roommate. "I'd like to hear it too." "All right, then, peace and quiet," Kelly said. "Just enough time to pass before the doctor gets here. Well, my grandfather was a merchant of the First Guild, had a house in St. Petersburg, and a mansion in a village nearby. He used to go there for the summer. He did serious business," Clara said. $1 million in philanthropy. He even helped children's schools. He paid scholarships to gifted students from poor families. And everything was going well for him. But bad luck. God didn't give him any children. His first wife was empty. They lived together for about 10 years, maybe more, and she didn't change. And then she died of consumption. My grandfather was widowed in due time and began to think of a new marriage. He really wanted an heir. He always said I'd created a good business. It would be a pity if it disappeared after my death. I must pass it on to someone. Well, Clara was from a noble family. Wow, Miranda smiled ironically against her will. So you must have aristocratic roots. On your grandmother's side? Yes, Kelly agreed. It's no use being aristocratic. She waved her hand irritably. About it only in novels you read good, but in reality nothing good. You know what they say, silk on the belly, silk in the belly. That's how our grandmother's family lived. A noble title, a long pedigree, and they barely made ends meet. And their father was young and spendthrift, and his fortune and great-grandmother's capital he skipped, all in restaurants courted. He played cards and went to resorts, and he didn't think that there were 7 children at home who had to be raised somehow. They had an estate. Yeah, they took it away for debts. They kept the house in town on their last pennies and couldn't afford it anymore. Yes, great-grandfather didn't want to give it up and move into a rented apartment. It was a blow to his reputation. You see, he kept servants and updated the furniture. He'd throw dinner parties. He did his best to create the appearance of wealth. But he went broke, of course. How did he find out he was bankrupt? He put a bullet in his forehead. Simple as that. What about your great-grandmother? Sarah, you're left with a lot of debt. He didn't care they had 7 kids. My great-grandfathers had a son, the eldest, then a son and 5 more younger ones. And they all had to be taught, fed, organized. They had the house foreclosed on in bankruptcy. Great-grandmother disbanded the servants, sold what she could, hired a small apartment, and they moved there. Nanny moved in with them. She was already old. She didn't want to leave the kids. She ran the whole household, took care of the kids. She worked for housing and food, but instead of a governess, my great-grandmother did it herself. She taught them everything: history, literature, languages, and drawing. She was an educated woman. I don't understand how she had time for everything. Kelly shook her head contritely and continued. The eldest son was given a position by his great-grandmother. She got him a job. And then Clara grew up 15 years. It's time to take the girl out to find a groom. What's there to look for? They don't have a single decent dress left. Dad, they all wore them. There was a debutante ball planned. Clara's going to it. Socially, she could be there, but not financially. But I couldn't miss the event. It was a chance. So my great-grandmother went to her relatives, near and far, to ask for money to get my grandmother together for the trip. It took her a long time to get through all kinds of reception centers. Somewhere in one of them, my grandfather spotted her. My grandfather was just being businesslike. He wanted a wife who would bear an heir. Clara's young, so there's a good chance of a large family, and one in which none of the babies had died. So the heredity is good, but not rich, which means they're fastidious. It won't cost a lot of money. He asked about my great-grandmother's family and came to talk to her. He promised that he'd support the family, and if she would give birth to his first son, he would provide her younger sisters with dowry. And he also demanded that the bride should be examined by a doctor and told whether there were any health obstacles for the birth of a child. It was like choosing a pedigree dog. Lisa said confusedly. Sort of, agreed Kelly. But in those days, often about so brides were chosen by pedigree, taking into account their own benefit. They didn't think much about love back then, only in books. What was it? Miranda was suddenly fascinated by history. Your great-grandmother agreed. Where could she go? She said in a self-evident tone of voice. Of course she repented. Wow, what words does our nurse know? Miranda marveled to herself. Misalliance, Kelly continued. Clara is from a noble family, from an old family. Her grandfather was a merchant, and he was in his late 50s, and Slaga was 15. But great-grandmother realized that she could hardly find a better groom for her daughter. There will be all sorts of noblemen chasing after the title. And if someone from the nobility is as poor as they are, and the grandfather was a man solid, reliable with a reputation for family maintenance promised. In general, great-grandmother decided to ask Lisa. No one asked Lisa. Kelly waved her hand. She was just faced with the fact. But she is a sensible girl. It was not to be spared. All she did was tell me that it was humiliating to be examined by a doctor. I've been listening to her stories, you know, and thinking for 15 years. Well, she's just a girl. My granddaughter is 16 now. I look at her. Well, she's still a child playing with dolls. What marriage? What children? And at that time, they believe that it is already a suitable age to take on the role of mistress of the house, wife, and mother. That's not how girls were brought up back then. Miranda stepped in. They were prepared for such a fate, and I don't think your grandmother would have crossed her. She understood that it was her duty to save her family, and her duty to people of her origin. It's very important. Above all, an aristocratic upbringing with meaning, she finished. Maybe, Kelly nodded. It's just a pity. I didn't care for her when she told me all that. Her great-grandmother was worried about her daughter, of course. There's a big age difference between her and her husband, and she should give birth as soon as possible. What if that merchant starts hurting her? What if the conception doesn't work out? A lot of different things. What if it did? But everything worked out in this marriage. A year after the wedding, she gave birth to her firstborn son. How did you order it? Grandfather, as the child saw, she told me, sobbed with happiness. And since then, he was ready to carry his young wife in his arms and never refused her anything. She told me when her great-grandmother came to visit them. Yes, when she saw how her grandfather treated her, she only nodded her head. She said that he was a merchant of a trade class, but he treated his wife with affection and respect. So she did not see such treatment from every nobleman, and from her husband, my great-grandfather, that is, and even more so. In vain, she was worried. Then she gave birth to 2 more children, my second son and my daughter Mama. And my grandfather kept his promise. The family Clara took on the content, hired them a good house servants younger in the gymnasium boarding school, arranged sisters' dowry, put outings in the world paid. In general, naturally the whole family was saved. Great-grandmother at least lived out her life in peace and prosperity. Why only great-grandmother? Lisa asked. And the Sligas are yours. Why did they live in peace and prosperity? What about the family 1 million? Kelly looked at the girl affectionately and condescendingly, as she looks at a child who has passed an obviously stupid and a little inappropriate question. But not out of spite, just out of ignorance. It was at the turn of the century, my dear, she said calmly. My mother was born a girl before the revolution. I, of course, were older, but all the same teenagers. And when the Bolsheviks came, my grandfather was shot. His shops were nationalized, and my grandmother and her children were evicted from the city. As a class alien element, what became of her sisters and brothers? She didn't know until their death. At that moment, she was afraid to turn to them for help, as if they themselves would not be jeopardized. And then they were confused. You can't find everything. Back then, many people changed their names and forged documents. Just to hide their origins, they traveled all over the country. Do you know where and under what names to look for relatives now? Women, even with their children, wandered around the provinces for a long time. The eldest son became a revolutionary during these wanderings. He joined the Red Army and disappeared somewhere during the Civil War. The younger son died of diphtheria, and Clara and my mother. In the end, we settled in a village in the Pskov region. It was a small village of 20 yards. They made it a branch of a large collective farm. They'd provided work and a house. My mom grew up there, met my father, and got married. I was born in 30. Then I had a little brother and a little sister. We never ran out of them. So we lived quietly. And how come you're from the Pskov region? Did Kelly get to us in the Sverdlovsk region? Miranda asked. To cultivate the virgin land. Let's go. As a woman suddenly got angry. I know, as the German came and drove us out of our place. It was still a long way to the virgin land then. She grumbled, disapprovingly, looking at the neighbor. Oh, Kelly, Lisa exclaimed. And you were still a little girl during the war. Do you remember anything about it? Do you or don't you? If you don't want to, if it hurts, don't tell me. Were you evacuated? Yes, evacuated. Kelly said the word irritated. Jesus, girl. They evacuated factories with their employees, scientific institutes and factories. People who were potentially valuable to the state, you know. And who are we? Kolkhozniki. Plowing the land and pulling weeds is not much of a specialty. Valuable specialization, they say, is anyone. Even a complete idiot can be trained. Why should the state waste resources evacuating villages? The war will be over. Will it find someone to send to the collective farms and get them involved in the raising of virgin lands? I'm sorry, Kelly. Miranda spoke conciliatorily. I guess I'm weak, and my head doesn't want to think. I didn't realize that your childhood was during the war years. I started asking you silly questions. You don't have to tell me. if you don't want to remember. She herself was born a year before the war and didn't remember the war years at all. And it was hardly possible to compare the rear strike with the central part of the country, where fierce battles were boiling. To remember, said the nurse in a tone quite conciliatory, but with an obvious touch of bitterness. Yes, if I ever forget it, I'll tell you now that I started. And our doctor is delayed somewhere. Both patients fell silent and looked at the splits with expectant sympathy and gratitude. Kelly took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts and perhaps her spirit for the story. Our little village was about 20 yards. I don't remember what it was called. And now I don't even recognize it anymore. We lived mostly in vegetable gardens. We didn't keep cattle. It was expensive and troublesome. Working on the collective farm took up a lot of time. We had only a cat at home. Of course, Miranda thought, without a cat. Kelly smiled gently. She could see that she was pleased to remember the museum. The cat was our babysitter, she said. My little grandmother would put me in the yard, and she would put benches around me so I wouldn't crawl anywhere, and she would rustle around the yard or dig in the vegetable garden. I'm sitting with boredom for a roar. And then there's a 6-stone beach rubbing around, licking her face, touching her paws, calming her down. So my grandmother said you consume her by the ears and chew her tail and knit pretzels with your paw. But she puts up with it. She understands that you can't hurt a child. That's how she taught me. And then my younger ones. But they were smaller. I helped the nanny there. And Bosca followed me all over the village, like a little dog, seeing me off everywhere. How did the war start? All our men were taken to the front, and my father too. There was only one man left in the whole village. There was one man, I mean his house, opposite ours. He often came to our house as a neighbor. That's what the younger ones called him. They couldn't pronounce it yet. He was one-legged, walked on wood. Where did he ask to serve? They turned him down, and we were left with only women. Yes, kids, a few old men. The Germans captured Pskov at the very beginning of the war. It's clear that they quickly took the surrounding villages under their control. But we didn't really know anything. Our village was in the middle of nowhere. We only heard all the news on the radio. There was no other way. We heard the rumble of fighting from afar. But what was going on? Who was winning? Didn't know. Not for long. This our ignorance continued to sway again silent, rolled to the window, then to the door something long. The doctor's not coming today. She mumbled, as if to herself, then sighed and continued talking. The summer was hot, then stood drought. But that day, especially hot, was the day Mom and Clara took Perrin outside. They laid out the cushions in the sun to roast. We opened the cellar for a little juice. We had 2 cellars, one in the house and the other on the street, on the edge of the plot. We kept potatoes in it. The potatoes were all gone for the winter. So we opened it. About frying. The kids and I were hanging around outside, and my Bosca was nearby. I'm afraid of her. Suddenly, she'll break free and run away from me. I'll follow her, and she'll go out of the yard and towards the open cellar. I followed her, and she was throwing a pin in her teeth into the cellar, and she was racing down the stairs. I followed her so cleverly, but I stumbled into the cellar and fell. Clara saw it and ran after me. I hear her calling me from above. Can't I get up? Yes, I can. It was a big mistake, but I had a fight, and she started to come down after me. And somehow she turned so much while she was coming down that she dropped the supports and the cellar lid slammed down on her. And though it was wooden and happy, it was already heavy. But it was heavy. It's good. You can't just open it from the inside. But she came down to me and fumbled. She says I'm all right. I didn't break anything. You just bumped yourself. Yeah, I got scared. We'll climb back up on our own. She climbed up the ladder and pushed the lid, but it wouldn't budge, and it's not comfortable with the ladder. You can't push it anywhere. Grandma had a fight with her. Paulo Hello came back down to me. We sat next to each other. We are sitting, Buska is here torturing something. Clara scolded her with milk and lured the girl here, and me after her outrage. So we're sitting here. What else can we do? One hope that Mom will look for us. She'll call us around the yard and see that the cellar has slammed shut. Maybe she'll figure it out, or the little one will show her. We've been sitting for a long time. No one's looking for us outside. There's some noise. We made some noise too, but not much. It's no use shouting. It hurts to bang on the lid with our fists. I guess they can't hear us either. I dozed off, and I smelled through my sleep from under the cellar lid, as fried meat smells like cutlets or, say, shish kebab. Where would meat come from at that time? I lay there thinking, what a good dream. Then I got hungry. Woke up finally. Grandma's dozing too. She's sitting up. I hear snoring. How long did we sleep like that? I don't even know. I blurted out, saying I was hungry. She told me to crawl around the pit, to crawl, to scrounge. Suddenly, she says, what potatoes, Lena, or carrots? So I started searching. I didn't find any food, but I found a thick dirk. I don't know where it came from in the cellar, said Clara. She found it. She grabbed it and began to beat the lid with it. It was easier than using her hands from the ladder. He directly from the floor to the edge of climbing. To get grandmother with it, the lid of the cellar a little managed to move, and then she was already pushing her little by little. That's how she opened the way up for us. We got out of the cellar to go for a walk, and our village was gone. What do you mean gone? Lisa marveled. Are you in a parallel world like in science fiction? No, dear, sighed Kelly. The world was our very real one. And the ashes of our village are also quite real. Even the village is still somewhere. But from our house, only the hulk of a stove remains, and a pile of burnt logs. And the neighbors' houses, where there are more, where there are less, neither houses nor barns. Smoke and ashes by the coals, ruins, and the smell of burning. Clara is standing over it all, crossing herself, unable to utter a word. I, looking around, can't understand anything. Buska came out after us. She's shouting in her own way and looking around. And from the neighboring plot, a man is coming towards us. Look at him, a man, Grammy, all in sundresses, and he told us everything about what happened. He was hiding from the heat in the house. He heard a noise outside and looked out the window. Germans on motorcycles entered the village, stood in the middle of the street, scattered in the yards, and let's pull out of the houses all the barn, wool or baths, all outbuildings. In general, while the rivers were howling, while the houses were howling, one of the soldiers grabbed our mom and began to twirl her in all directions, saying that she was beautiful. So he decided to take care of her. And Mom came back. She grabbed the shovel and he didn't look back at him yet. Another soldier from behind jumped up to the rifle and hit Mom on the head, hit her head with the butt of the rifle. She fell into the house from being dragged. They threw the kids in with her. Yeah, locked up. He saw with irony that the soldiers were coming to his house, and he had a wonderful house with 2 entrances, one door to the street, and the other from the house to the vegetable garden. So he jumped out the second door. Yes, into his little dome. Olenek was unattended, all mixed up. So he survived there in the bushes. They didn't see him from there and washed him. The Germans gathered all the villagers in the street and put the older kids in a column and the rest of them in the nearest houses and locked them up, then doused them with gasoline and set them on fire. The summer was hot and dry before the gasoline was still busy quickly. Women screaming, children crying. People in the houses were pounding on the windows. One aunt jumped out of the column and ran to her house. Her mother was lying there, not walking, so they put her down immediately with a machine gun and drove our villagers along the road shooting only upwards for fun. And they, as the column disappeared through the bushes, crawled up to Chan with water. They were collecting water for irrigation, so he dived there. That's where the fire is, and waited out. And when the fire died down, he went around the village to look. Maybe there was a survivor. Who else found us like that? Serov didn't say. I'm sitting, looking at all this fists clenching roar like a little child, And I realize that I can do nothing. I won't help my son or anyone else. I'll just lie down myself. And it's so disgusting. A young woman grabbed a shovel, and she wasn't afraid. And I'm a soldier. I went through the war and hid in the bushes. But that's what he said later. But then, as he told me everything, I turned around and went to our house. I remember walking with her back straight. She always had good posture. She was brought up from childhood not to be proud. But then, there was something scary about that straight back. It was like she was made of wood. It was like a woman walking like a dead woman. What kind of pagan idol? Floating above the ground, heavy and clumsy. Grandmother came to the place where the porch stood, collapsed to the ground and howled. Kelly was quiet for a moment, then turned to her neighbor. You say, Miranda, aristocratic upbringing, dignity. That's all of it. And I tell you, in moments of the bitterest grief, of the blackest despair, every creature and aristocrat, and peasant woman, and wolf, forest, and stray dog howls the same. The terrible vine was from within, walking, all bodies turned. We watched ironically, but we couldn't move. It seems necessary to approach, to comfort his scary nose to the place chained, as if I realized later, we would then and would not have done anything. As someone consoles when a person suddenly and at once lost, and daughter and grandchildren, and the shelter of a lifetime, consider, you should have. It's up to you to turn it off, to cut it out, to let it out of you. There can be no help in such a case. A man has to do it himself. The main thing is not to interfere. Miranda lowered her eyes. She didn't know what to say. She had never experienced such emotions. Even the deaths of her husband and parents had been taken for granted and inevitable. But the orderly story had shaken her, and not only her. Jesus, Lisa muttered and took a drink. We went into the woods afterward. Kelly continued, not paying much attention to the sobbing. At first we tried one neighboring village. It was useless to go to another. Everywhere, the Germans decided then to keep deep and wait for our soldiers to come. They couldn't fail to come, could they? But we quickly realized that we could not survive even a summer in the forest. We had nothing with us. No tools, no warm clothes, no food, only a knife. He took it when he ran out of the house. We took a bucket from the well. They used it to carry the embers from that fire. They made fires with them, kept them as the apple of their eye. Without fire in the forest, it was like death to be left behind. So the three of us went to the neighboring region. I mean, 4 of us. Of course, Bosco went with us. I refused to leave without her. Clara persuaded me that I would carry her in my arms all the way. But I wouldn't leave her. And Grandma didn't mind. She said, how could I leave her here if she saved our lives, if she didn't lure you into the cellar? We'd be lying here in the ruins of coal. And she apologized to the music, saying I shouldn't have taken you to the cellar. What's the matter with you? I wish I'd known sooner. I would have sent my daughter and grandchildren to run after you. Anyway, Bosco came with us. Part of the way I carried her, part of the way she ran beside me. We weren't walking fast then either. We didn't have much strength. We were hungry, digging up some roots and chewing grass. Then by midsummer berries and mushrooms came. It became easier. So imagine, she fed us and caught bigger birds or frogs and brought them to us. Ironically, they were carved on the fire with pieces on the branches. And we ate them, and we ate the frogs. Lisa didn't believe it. And we ate frogs. Agreed to be swayed. Why shouldn't we eat them? The French right. They eat them. And what's worse for us? The beach saved us in the end. Already closer to autumn, we have completely strengthened. And we never reached the neighboring region. They got confused. No other way. And here she is one morning and calls us somewhere. She's really calling us. She walks a couple steps away and turns around. She's looking at us, and she's teaching us. But we followed her. It seemed like a wilderness of some kind. And she kept calling. We go. We don't know why, but we go. And eventually we came to a partisan camp. Yes, it was so open that we wouldn't have found it ourselves. The cat is a beast. It understands these things better than man. It smelled the place to live. It was our life-saving cat that led us to it. We lived in the camp for a while, treated, rested, ate a little. And then the partisans took us to the railroad. They had their own people at the station, or what should we call it? I didn't know then, and I don't know now. Anyway, they put us on a train with the evacuees. With them, we ended up in Sverdlovsk and settled down here. She lived with me all her life until she was 90 years old. She lived to see her great-grandchildren, and wherever we lived with her, she always fed street cats, treated them, nursed them back to health, and thanked the whole cat family. So, for being alive. And I did the same thing and still do. If it wasn't for the cat, I wouldn't be alive. What about your Boska? Didn't you take her with you to Sverdlovsk? Lisa was surprised. No, she shook her head. Kelly Bushka with irony stayed near Pskov. In the partisan camp, Serov did not want to take revenge for the village and fellow villagers. So he joined the partisan movement. There his village instead of a leg was not looked at much, and Boska refused to go with us. We thought she let us know that she helped us as much as she could. You'll manage on your own from now on. And in the camp she was only welcome. There were a lot of mice in the dugouts. So our cat went to the partisans too. Finished swinging with a smile. You, Kelly, should write books too, said Lisa. Such a fate, you know. The girl's eyes were still wet, but the partisan cat seemed to have cheered her up a little and calmed her down. That you waved your hand, Kelly Andreevna. Such fates are full of Russia. Just dig. The Leningrad blockade survivors. Listen or read. That's where the fates are. That's where people were unbending. That's where everyone had a notion of duty and dignity, no matter whether they were aristocrats or peasants. Miranda caught the stiletto in her address, but she didn't answer it. She was too much shaken by the story told by her neighbor. Horror, pity, shame, embarrassment, empathy, and admiration all at once rose up in her soul. Until all this is not settled, did not want to speak aloud. And I have no books to write. The nurse added, it's me who can tell a story out loud. But 2 words are not fresh on paper. Even letters have always been hard for me. There's our Dr. Mason, and we're waiting for you. Mommy, wake up. Miranda heard it through her sleep. She didn't want to open her eyes. All night she'd been replaying in her head Kelly's story. Empathized, and the ordeal the elderly woman and her family endured sympathized with her sorrow. Terrorized by the introduction of a burned village and a woman with a shovel fighting off German soldiers, fed herself for the fact that so coldly and arrogantly communicated with her neighbor, considering kind treatment of her beneath her dignity, for teasing her about her fiddling with the cats, for all these worries to fall asleep only in the morning. And then, Mom, wake up. The voice sounded irritated. A strong hand grasped Bracker's shoulder and shook him. The woman reluctantly molded her eyelids, but immediately brightened. Standing in front of the bed was Christina. Christina, Miranda's daughter, was with a man. Cindy finally got through to you. And Cindy, yeah, she called a week ago. And she shrugged her shoulder. I haven't had time to get out to see you. You know, business, and your visiting hours are terrible. They're inconveniently scheduled. I just came in and slipped the nurse a tenner to let me into the ward. There was a squawk in the next bed. Lisa raised her head curiously, looking at the visitor. Hello, she said. Christina ignored the greeting. I see you've got a nice room from the VIP segment. That's what the nurse told me, who let me in, the girl explained. Let's go, she said. We have VIP rooms here. Well, I thought so. You bet. My mother won't be lying with all those people. Miranda felt herself blushing. Are you all right here? She asked her daughter. Yes, I'm fine, Bracker mumbled. She suddenly felt awkward talking to Christina like this behind her back, not at this meeting and after a restless night. In addition, her bladder suddenly began to remind her of itself. Christina, there is a vessel under the bed. Embarrassed, said Miranda. Hand it over, please. Where's your nurse? The daughter was surprised, not moving from her seat. I was told there's a grandmother looking after you, hired someone. It's my neighbor who takes care of me, the woman explained. The neighbor is that you seem to be except for food. No one else has not really communicated with anyone. Christina was surprised and seemed to have completely forgotten about the request for a boat. New roommate Kelly, Miranda explained. Is this your crazy Friday or what? Her daughter quirked an eyebrow. You're friends with her, aren't you? Look, Mom, be careful. They say it's contagious by the ears. Soon you'll be gathering your relatives on the streets too. Miranda blushed even more. She felt sorry that she had once described the new neighbor and her emotions about her to her daughter in a fit of irritation. Out of the corner of her eye, the woman noticed Lisa's face. The girl could hardly restrain herself from cutting Christina short for thinking out loud and throwing herself on the defense. Kelly, however, suddenly realized her daughter. You said she worked as an orderly. But that's right. Then you're getting professional care. Good for you. You know who to get. Although, of course, I'd rather have a nurse than an orderly. But that's probably more expensive. You're probably costing yourself a fortune with your treatment, considering the room. Christina, the ship tried to remind Miranda, but the door opened and Kelly walked in with her usual bag of groceries. Good morning, she said, her traditional affectionate greeting. Oh, we have visitors already. Not too early. There's a reason for the regimen. Your regimen doesn't work for me, Christina said. I can't leave my clients to spend the middle of the day on Maiden going to hospitals. Of course, Lisa said to herself, client girls are any more expensive than their own mother. Christina turned sharply to the girl, and Miranda realized that a scandal was about to break out. She hurried to intervene. Kelly, this is my daughter Christina, she said. She has a very busy schedule indeed. Don't turn us in to the doctors, please. Christina, this is Kelly, and you're the one taking care of Mom, says the daughter. Oh, great. It didn't occur to her to say hello to the lady who came in, of course. Since your nurse is here, I'll go. I won't bother you, said Christina. She'll get you a boat, by the way. Don't wait for the doctor. Would you like a chat? The nurse asked. Why should I? Christina was surprised. I see Mom's alive. She's homeless. What else? In medical terms, I do not understand anything anyway. And your doctor will probably scold me as well as you for breaking the regimen. She picked up her purse and turned to Kelly. Do I owe you anything? What do you mean? The woman didn't understand. But for taking care of you, Christina explained. You're wasting your time and energy. Kelly frowned slightly. You don't owe me anything. It's all right, she replied sternly. I'm just helping out. Humanly, neighborly. That's fine. She instantly calmed down. Oh, by the way, Mom, I brought you some hotels. I almost forgot. Her daughter rummaged through her bag and put on the nightstand a plump bag filled with fatty arrests. The flavor of what rivers? The women stared at him in bewilderment. Miranda felt like crying or falling through the bunk with shame. My mother-in-law had gotten a little crazy last night, Christina explained without embarrassment. There's a whole basin in the heat, and where should we put it? Lenichka has gastritis. I'm on a diet. Boys do not eat such things. You know today's teenagers. All they want is hamburgers and pizza. Do you have to go, Christina? Unexpectedly hard, said Kelly. The girl did not argue and quickly disappeared out the door, waved to her mother. The room was silent as she said goodbye. Miranda covered her face with her hands. Lisa said slowly and in surprise, "What the hell is this?" But Kelly silenced the girl with a quick glance. She leaned toward her ward. But then the door of the room banged softly. Mason came in on his morning rounds. When he saw the package on the bedside table, he froze in the middle of the room and was angrily perplexed. "Kelly's nurse for you," he said angrily. "What are these tricks? What's the Cheberiki for?" Miranda had her gallbladder removed. We fought for hours in the OR to keep her alive. And you want to undo all our work. Now, every kid knows that after a surgery like that, you need a strict diet. And you, with your experience in our field, you're seriously considering feeding it to your ward. What kind of sabotage is this? Bracker crumpled into her pillow. She was already terribly ashamed of her daughter and her inappropriate innings that so blatantly showed her disregard for her mother. And how to explain herself to the doctor about it she had no idea at all. She bitterly remembered how she had waited for Christina, hoping that she would take care of her, rid her of her unlovely neighbor, and mocked herself. Had she forgotten what her daughter was? Once daring, she imagined her as a caregiver, and to add to the mental torment, her bladder was increasingly active. Mason rushed Kelly. "Yeah, what do you think? I brought these for you." "Well, I mean, not just you. All orders of tartar named Sis. You know, I went on a baking binge last night. I had a whole bowl of them coming over. My son has gastritis, my daughter-in-law is on a diet, and the grandkids don't eat that stuff. They want hamburgers and pizza. You know what she was doing to today's teenagers. I know you're coming in on your rounds, so I took them out right away to give them to you. You'll take them to me right after your rounds. You're drinking tea. We'll talk about mine and Miranda's. Because we haven't had a chance yet. I just came by to tell you today." Behind this chatter, Kelly taught the doctor a bag with the unfortunate Cheburek and pushed him to the door, securing his promise to come with an examination. In half an hour. You, having seen Mason off, the woman approached the bedside of her ward. "Miranda, are you okay?" she asked. "I'll take care of the washing up." "Disgusting," Miranda confessed honestly. "We will. But first, Kelly, please give me the boat." Miranda steered with confidence. After a week and a half, she began to get out of bed and walk around the ward and then around the department. The only thing that struck her about the surgery was the clean and tidy corridor. The wards had not seen repairs for a long time, and the cleanliness in them was kept very relative. In fact, when the walls of Loscuto fly off the paint to wash them, they are often not an easy task. No matter how hard the local nurses tried, they could not achieve sterile and neat rooms. Most of the wards had 6 to 9 beds. The narrow aisles between them were occupied by bedside tables. When it was necessary to enter the room to the ceiling, for example, when placing a patient from the operating room began turmoil, nightstands were taken out into the corridor. Beds were moved so that the girl could pass. Walking patients were asked to move out of their seats for a while. And over all this prison hovered the heavy odor of paid bodies, medicines, waste, human life, blood, pus, and others in the wards. How much was not mine? How much was not ventilation, not quartz? It was impossible to get rid of it. Miranda thanked fate for lying in more comfortable conditions. However, she realized that fate had nothing to do with it in this case. Even after Christina's visit, she was interested in the mention of her daughter, and in the VIP wards, she tried to question the girl and got a simple explanation. "When were you brought in?" "There were no beds in the regular wards. You could either go to the corridor or to a paid room, as long as they were available. But I asked them not to put you in the corridor. It's impossible to lie in such conditions after surgery. Mason and I go way back. He was very cooperative." Bracker tried asking questions about the cost of the room, how long they'd keep her here, what would happen if she needed a paid spot. But Kelly only guffawed and told her ward not to fill her head with trivia. The mystery of the VIP place came to Miranda unexpectedly and shocked her, perhaps more than anything she had already learned about her caregiver roommate. That day, 3 weeks after the operation, Lisa was discharged. The girl was already quite recovered and was happily bustling around the room, packing and daydreaming aloud. How the first thing she would do after coming home would be to take a bath with fragrant foam. The ward had a shower room, but patients were forbidden to wash. Surgery. You have to wait for the stitches to fully heal. So they had made do with only wounds, bodies, and woes since they had been hospitalized, since they could stand up and walk confidently. Miranda was slightly envious of the girl. Lisa was picked up by her father, a middle-aged man, dressed expensively and stylishly, and holding himself with restrained politeness. The girl hugged Miranda goodbye, and Kelly dragged her along to walk her to the car. Bracker pulled onto the bed and closed her eyes. It had been almost a month since she had been alone indoors in relative silence. Turns out she missed it a lot. She lay quietly, motionless, and enjoyed the surrounding emptiness and absence of extraneous sounds. The chance to relax and not hold her face, just to rest from everyone for a few minutes at least. When the ward door banged softly, she didn't open her eyes, wanting to prolong her solitude just a little longer. Perhaps Kelly would think she'd fallen asleep and be away on her own for a while. The footsteps of two people strode through the room, rubbing the steps of two people. Then there was a slight rustle at the next bedside, and Kelly's voice said in a half-whisper, "Come on. You shouldn't have come up. I would have gotten it myself." "Wait, Kelly." Also a muffled male voice answered her. Miranda recognized Lisa's father. "I specifically went with you to talk to you in private. Tell me, how long does your ward have to stay in the hospital?" "Until the end of next week. That's 10 days. Have you decided what you're going to do with the ward yet?" "Oh, Kelly, I haven't yet. But I'm gonna talk to the head of the pay ward today. There are openings right now. I'm hoping they won't all be taken in the next few days, so we don't have to worry. Mason has promised to assist me in this conversation. Kelly, there's a simpler solution. I will pay for this room for the next 10 days. Then it will be listed as yours, and you really won't have to worry. We'll consider it your fee for taking care of Lisa." "Oh, really?" The nurse's voice became embarrassed. "I've received my fee in full. You let Miranda stay here. You didn't object to a second bed. That's what we agreed. In fact, didn't we? Lisa's been discharged. You no longer require my services. Then consider this a tip." The man's voice was insistent. "You see, Kelly, it's not just that you've saved me the money to pay for a nurse and the trouble of finding one. I see the way Lisa interacts with you, the way she's bonded with you. That is more important to me than professional care. You've given my daughter emotional support. You've kept her from falling into depression. You've become a real friend to her since the surgery. That means a lot to her, and that means a lot to me. I was worried sick on my business trip. How did Lisa take it all? She's a home girl. She's never even been to kids' camps. She's never been away from home alone for any length of time. I was worried that she would be frightened of her new surroundings, that she would be oppressed by the pain and helplessness. But she didn't mention any of that yesterday or today. But you've been praised to the hilt. She even asked for permission to invite you to visit us. By the way, would you be willing to visit us?" "Yes, of course," Kelly said, confused. "I've grown very fond of Lisa too." "That's fine," said the man. "Then you will go and take the book to Lisa and agree with her about the day of your visit. I'll go to the accounting department and pay for 10 days of use of this room. Then I'll come down to your room and give you the documents. And Kelly, in keeping with your modesty, if 10 days isn't enough, just give me a call. I'll pay what you need. That's your tip. Remember." There was a smile in the man's voice, a rustle of footsteps, a soft slam. The door, and Lisa was alone again. Overhearing the dialogue stunned her. So this was why her nurse had been so diligent in caring for Lisa as well. She had made a deal with her father that in exchange for caring for the girl, he would let her have a seat in her room. She didn't want her roommate to be a stranger. She basically had a woman lying in the hallway after surgery, and then in a cramped, missing feature than a room. A dozen beds. You have to have some intelligence, sense other people, anticipate their reactions. Our Kelly didn't have that. Ashamed, she recalled her own words. It turns out that the woman she thought was an ignorant orderly has access to not only intelligence and empathy, but also savvy and decency, and the ability to make a quick decision and compassion, simple human compassion. Turns out it doesn't just extend to cats. The blessed one called her Cindy. No, not blessed, just a normal person who managed in all his ordeal to preserve purity of soul and true nobility, and not lose sympathy for others. God, what a shame she didn't see it sooner. Miranda, we're having a celebratory dinner in honor of your discharge tomorrow. Steamed fish, Kelly announced solemnly, pulling mine from the refrigerator. Bracker pretended to be frightened. The nurse laughed, followed by her ward. I'm going to splurge on a hump for something like this, Kelly announced, and my cats are eating now. Rain's daughter-in-law said that sniff my jam twice a week. She does not agree and buys them pollock. Oh, I'm afraid they'll turn their noses up at my cheap fish later. Why don't you buy fish from wholesale bazaars? Miranda asked, chewing on a steamed gorbushka with pleasure. After all, it's cheaper there than in the stores. You could afford pollock for the same money. But you have to go. It's hard for me. And it's far away. Would you order from Cindy? Bracker suggested it. She and her husband often go there, take orders from neighbors, bring what they need. What kind of savings is that? Kelly laughed. She offered to bring me a box of hams once. But I said yes, and when I brought it to her, she charged me so much at the nearest market. It's cheaper to get it, she said, for the delivery and the time saved. What did you want? I didn't want it that way. I refused. I had to buy those hams from her. I said, eat them yourself. She didn't offer any more. Miranda asked the nurse for the price of her food and was surprised to hear the same amount that she herself always paid to her neighbor. It was just that Bracker did not go to the market, considering it a place that was not very suitable for herself, preferring to store in stores, and to find out how much a box brought to her at the base cost, and even to check the information from Cindy, simply did not occur to her. So the nimble neighbor shamelessly used it. So much for the old guard. So much for being the senior researcher, wife of an academic. And it became disgusting. Of course, she will not clarify relations with her friend, but she will stop ordering her shopping. It's certainly not out of greed, but out of unwillingness to face her dishonesty once again. Having made such a decision, Miranda was a little surprised at herself a month ago. Having received such information, she would hardly have made such a conclusion. On the contrary, she would have justified this Cindy, thinking that the delivery and the time saved were really worth the money, that cooperation with her neighbor should be beneficial to both of them, and something along those lines. About the same way she constantly justified Christina, for example. But now, after all the worries of the last month, Bracker was determined to accept the truth about people, no matter how unpleasant it seemed, and adjust her behavior with those people accordingly. She didn't have much life left to waste on those who hated or neglected her. The discharge was brought to them around noon. By this time, their things were packed. The ward was tidied up. Miranda had washed and listened to her head and changed into a dress and shoes brought to her by a neighbor from home. She was fully prepared to leave the ward. As she walked down the stairs, she wondered aloud how we'd get there, Kelly. There's no direct bus from here, so we'd have to change buses. What bus, Miranda? The neighbor laughed. There's a car waiting. She opened the hospital doors for the woman and is stunned. Bracker saw a huge black Jeep at the hospital porch, spreading diesel aromas around it from behind the wheel. Smiling welcomingly in all 32 teeth was a shaven-headed thug. Here, Jacob agreed to help, Kelly said in a satisfied tone, and pulled her stunned neighbor along with her. The thug, identified as Jacob, jumped out of the car, said hello to the women, and gallantly opened the door of the Jeep. He helped Miranda into the back seat and informed her you can ride, even lying down if you have to. The size allows, so don't be shy. Bracker regarded the interior with interest. Surprisingly, inside there was no smell of fuel at all. There was a pleasant coolness and a light fragrance of expensive cologne. Throwing a glance through the windows, Miranda marveled at the height of the Jeep. People on the sidewalks were hardly visible. How do you spot pedestrians? Jacob, she asked. With difficulty, the bandit laughed. Settles Kelly in the front seat. If they're in front of the car, there's a chance you'll see them. If they come from the side, I just can't see them when they pull out of somewhere. I try to honk so some Owen doesn't get under my wheels. But mostly pedestrians notice me and jump in time. This behemoth was hard to miss. He patted the steering wheel of the car with a satisfied grin. All right, everybody ready to go. All the way up the road, the bandit. Jacob was having a lively conversation with Kelly. It turned out that the bandit had a thoroughbred cat, Armor, Shell with a very complex character. Jacob and his family long agonized with the animal, not understanding how to raise it. But the former nurse managed to give the bandit some advice. So with her suggestion, Jacob changed the Guild brand fill and sip, and puddles in inappropriate places stopped. The family acquired several as a flower and climbed, so that the cat had a place to splash out energy and not to ruin the atmosphere in the apartment. Vrumtel began to take out for walks in crooks and feed about groves. Because of what stopped, cat attacks on indoor flowers and open pots are a thing of the past. Well, and something else on the little things. Miranda did not remember all the subtleties of raising cats because at some point she felt worse. She was shaking as the road began to whimper, the stitches that had seemed to come alive. And part of the conversation was left unattended by her. Toward the end of the trip, the woman still decided to take Jacob's permission and lay back in the seat. But when the Jeep stopped, she thought with horror that now she would have to get up and scramble out of the high interior. There was practically no strength to do so. Jacob opened the door from the outside, looked into the back seat, and then somehow deftly picked Miranda up on his arm and took her out of the cabin and carried her to the entrance. "Permission, madam," he said gallantly as he groomed you a little. "For a long time I have not carried such graceful and slender women in my arms. You should have your spouse violent in the arsenal be," responded indignant Miranda. "Kelly, put the bags down. Now we will deliver your ward, and I'll go down for them," Jacob said sternly. "Go ahead and open the doors." Then he leaned slightly toward Bracker and said mockingly, "Alas, the last time I carried my wife in my arms was on our wedding day. And even then she was noticeably heavier. I must confess. And now she's all overgrown. She's a busy lady now. I'd say she's monumental. I can only hold her in my arms, but I don't have the health for that. But you'd be nice to carry her, wouldn't you? You wouldn't deny me a little pleasure." Unexpectedly for myself. Bracker laughed heartily and lightly. "Quite nice this Jacob, it turns out, is not such a bandit." The neighbors brought Miranda into the apartment, laid her on the couch, and carried her bags. Kelly spent some time talking about what was on what shelf in the refrigerator and what should be eaten first. It turned out that she had once had time to cook with a reserve of diet food to comply with the new Bracker diet regime and had about half a year to go at least. Finally, the counselors dispersed and Miranda was left alone. She kicked off her shoes, stretched out on the couch, and covered her eyes. The apartment was quiet. No one came from the body next to the book pages fiddling on the next bed. Did not step slippers, did not talk in whispers of nonsense. It had been an awfully long time since the woman had been alone indoors, and it suddenly became clear that it wasn't so pleasant. It would be nice to have someone around right now. Bracker suddenly thought. Even a cat. Miranda was coming back from the store. The bag was pulling her arm back pleasantly, even though she was forbidden to carry heavy things. After the surgery, the woman decided that 2 kilograms would do no harm. Approaching the turn into the yard, she cautiously peeked into the passage and, making sure that the way was free, boldly walked on the asphalt. As she exited the house, she had seen Jacob's Jeep in the parking lot by the driveway, and now feared she would collide with it. As she drove out of the yard, she already knew that the driver wouldn't be able to see her, and at the same time she realized that she wouldn't be able to gracefully jump the curb when operation she couldn't yet. Practice later, of course. But for now, it was better to take preventive measures and make sure the path was clear. Miranda heard a familiar voice. "But at last you've come back to her." Cindy moved through the square, her whole demeanor expressing her joy at her neighbor's return. "Did I see you brought home yesterday?" That gate marshal said yes. "I can't believe our blessed lady talked him into it. I told her to do it as a joke. You advised her. Excuse me, Miranda. Oh, yes. Cindy started explaining. She came to me first to look for a car for a drink, because it's not convenient to get there by transport after such an operation. There's no direct routes. It's exhausting and it's risky. Someone in the crowd could push Pasha into the car. She knows we have a car. So what are you interested in? Miranda asked. Oh, you know our car. It's just a name. The neighbor waved her hand. It's old and falling apart. And that way where your hospital was. The road's there, pothole upon pothole, not maintained at all. We'd leave the whole suspension on them. And repairs aren't cheap these days. I jokingly told her that only Jeeps should drive on those roads. They're not afraid of anything. They can go anywhere. Try, I said, to attract our Jeep. But I'm joking. But she's really joking. But at least you've ridden in a Jeep. How was it? Wasn't it scary? Miranda answered in a moderately restrained manner. Did I see him carrying you out of the car yesterday? He was waiting for you at 12 o'clock. Yes. Why didn't you come in? Bracker asked. I just thought you might want to clean up after the hospital. Get yourself cleaned up. And again, the apartment is not cleaned and stood for a month code in such a situation to ask for a visit, only to embarrass the owners. To Taratorkin Cindy. Miranda nodded her head. She hadn't even thought about the condition of the apartment. Only now she realized that the ubiquitous Kelly had somehow managed to clean it before she was discharged. At least there was no lingering dust, no small debris on the floor, no musty atmosphere. She did not detect the mustiness that inevitably appears in rooms that have been standing for even a couple of weeks without airing. Oh, here comes our blessed one. Cindy exclaimed softly and pointed with her hand in the direction. From around the corner, the neighbor did indeed emerge, carrying her usual bag and 3 cats, surrounded by 3 differently shaped cats. Miranda, without saying goodbye to her food, hurried to meet her. Kelly. Good morning. And you know, I had such good luck at the fish store today. I bought a couple pounds of pollock for your ward. Hopefully enough for 1 meal.
Subscribe and click the bell.
Yes. How could you think that about me? Michael looked at his wife, Adriana. What else was I supposed to think? She was very upset with him. I don't know. Call me first before you jump to conclusions. He resented her for being jealous of him today. Michael worked at a firm in the city, not the least of which was his job. Everything was going well. He never complained about life. Once upon a time, a handsome boy was born into an ordinary family. When he was brought from the hospital, he did not yet realize how lucky he was with his parents. His mom and dad just adored him. Whenever Michael needed to buy a toy, Dad would do it. They always spent weekends in the park. Everything was good in the family. Michael learned that from his parents. He never hurt girls at school or at daycare. He stood up for them. The boy was decent, honest. If his class teacher asked him to do something, he always did it. After graduation, Michael entered the institute. No one doubted that he would graduate. And now, in his senior year, his parents were going to celebrate his graduation in the country. Mom, Dad, I'm not going with you. He told them. What do you mean, you're not going? It's your party, and you won't be there. The woman didn't understand. You don't understand. Graduation at school is one thing, but now it's graduation at the institute. I'll never have a time like this again. And now we're going to get together with our friends to meet. Are you trying to stop me? He stood, smiling, looking at his father and mother. All right, fine. Where are you going to celebrate? His mom asked him. We haven't thought about it yet, but I think we'll go to a cafe, the young man said. The graduation went well, as Michael expected. And then it began. In all his years, he had never experienced the pain he felt the morning after graduation. Michael, hi. He picked up the phone and heard his aunt's voice. Hello, Aunt Betty. He wasn't thinking about anything today. Most likely his aunt was calling to congratulate him on his graduation. "Sweet nephew, don't get upset." She started saying strange things. "Auntie, do not understand you speak more clearly," frowned Michael. "Yesterday, when your parents were driving out of town, their car was thrown into the oncoming lane. There was a head-on collision." The woman said. "What?" Michael asked her again. "Michael, your parents are gone," she told him. "I don't understand." He shook his head and couldn't get his head around what his aunt was saying to him. "I realize you're in shock right now. I just want to tell you, I haven't done anything myself. I will come soon, and we will solve everything." She spoke quickly. She hung up. He hung up, went into the room, sat down on the couch. "What's going on?" Had Aunt Betty told him the truth? But his father was an excellent driver. He would never let him fall asleep at the wheel or anything else, Michael reasoned. The aunt came, a couple of days later, to organize the funeral. Even when the young man saw his parents in the casket, he couldn't believe what had happened in the cemetery. He cried quietly and realized that he was left all alone. Yes, he has an aunt and uncle, but they live far away, and the guy will not be able to come to them with his aunt. At least he was socializing, and he didn't know anything about his uncle at all, just his name. The moment Michael got home, he didn't want to talk to anyone. "The tried won't even talk to me." A woman approached him. "Please leave me alone." Politely, he asked her. At this point, Michael walked over to a picture that showed his mother and father. He took it in his hands and then stood silent for a long time. "Dad, Mom, I promise you I'm gonna do great, and you'll be proud of me." After that, he put the picture back in its place. Michael went and lay down on his bed. In the morning, the aunt was going to leave, but before that she decided to go to the cemetery one more time. She took Michael with her. But like at a funeral, he stood aside. A single tear rolled out of his eye. It slid down his cheek and went into the ground. Michael realized that his life was now divided into two parts, what he had with his parents and what he had now. In his hands, he had a diploma of higher education. He could start looking for a job. The young man could not find anything suitable for a long time. The profession of cashier salesman did not suit him. He wanted something serious. So 6 months passed. One day in a cafe, the young man overheard a conversation between two men. They were talking about their firm needing a courier. Michael had already made a joke. He had already heard about this firm. And now that there was an opportunity to get a job there, it didn't matter who. He didn't want to lose that chance. Within 10 minutes, he was sitting next to the men, showing them his accomplishments to this point in his life. "What are you, man? What kind of courier are you? Look at your credentials, school, college. All the couriers in the world would have one if they had one of these on their hands," said one of his new acquaintances. "Do you want to offer me something better?" Michael dared to ask. "Sure. Come back tomorrow. Here's my card." The man handed him a plastic card. Michael took it and went home happily. He entered the entrance, waited for the elevator. As soon as the elevator arrived, he stepped inside. Wait, he heard a voice and turned around. A pretty girl was running after him. He held the door for her. When she came in, he stood looking at her from the side. "Do you live in this entrance?" he asked. "No, I came to visit a friend." She laughed. "I see. Who's your girlfriend?" "I just live in this neighborhood. I know everybody." Did he mean what he said to her? "You probably don't know her. She came to visit her aunt." "Well, that makes sense. Why haven't I seen such nice girls in our elevator in a long time?" Michael told her. He was smiling. The elevator stopped. "Are you getting off on this floor?" the young man asked. "Yes." "Why?" "No, it's just that I'm coming the same way." He was very surprised. But when they got off the elevator, he went left, and she went right. When Michael stood already near the door, he turned around, looked at the stranger's back. "May I ask your name?" Sure. My name is Adriana." The young man inserted the key into the keyhole and had not yet made a single turn as he turned around again. "Adriana, Would you agree to meet me tonight? If you decide to be bold in the morning, you should stay that way." The young man decided. "I think it's kind of awkward." She was embarrassed. At that moment, the door opened and the friends saw each other. "I'm waiting for you all." The last words Michael said. Whether she heard or not, he does not know. The guy entered the apartment. Perhaps tomorrow he will get a new job, and today he will meet his future wife. Everything was good in his soul. Michael realized that if he chooses something in his life, it is forever. At 7:00 p.m., he left the apartment and headed to the place where he saw Adriana today. Michael pressed the call button one last time, and it took a long time for no one to open the door for him. Finally, a young girl appeared in the doorway. "Hi, who are you?" she asked. "Your neighbor. What's wrong? Are we flooding you?" No, it's okay. I met Adriana today. I made a date with her." "Came in," said the young man. "Come on in. She's been bugging me about it." The girl let him into the apartment and called her friend from the next room. Adriana was very surprised that Michael came by himself. Later, the young man found out that she had not heard when he made an appointment with her at 7:00. "Do you want to take me with you?" asked the one who opened the door for everyone today. "Yes, of course, Kathy. Come with us." Adriana looked at her. She didn't even ask Michael because she thought it was obvious, and Kathy would go with them too. Michael, of course, didn't really feel like going out with two girls, but there was no choice to either go with two or not go anywhere at all. They walked out of the apartment, down to the entryway. "To be honest, I'm not from around here. Everyone's gone out of town. They left me in charge of the landlady." Kathy started talking. "I asked Adriana to come over because I was bored, and Adriana was more and more silent. Apparently, she was attracting more attention from the young man. Michael planned to take the girls to the park, and then take them to a cafe. By evening, all three of them were sitting, talking, laughing, as if they had known each other for a long time. Would you like me to tell you my little secret?" Conspirator with whom Michael asked them in a whisper. "Do you have one?" Laughed the girls. Of course. He told them how this morning he met two men in a cafe, and they promised him a position in their company. "I've heard of that company," Adriana told him. She herself was at a technical school, so she had only a vague idea of what Michael was doing. "Well, shall we go home?" asked the young man because he had to get up early tomorrow. "Sure, let's go. Especially we live on the same floor," Kathy laughed. They went to their apartments. For tomorrow, Michael again scheduled a meeting with Adriana. Since morning, he had been preparing for no exams, no dates. He didn't prepare like this. The guy got out smoothly, combed his hair, put on the suit he only wore to prom, then went to that company to get a position. He was welcomed after seeing the guy's credentials, immediately offered a position as a specialist in the marketing department. When Michael was on his way back home, he planned that he would now stop by the girls' house, calling them to go for a walk. They would also sit in the cafe, celebrating his acceptance of the new jobs. The girls, of course, weren't expecting him, but when he reappeared at the door, they were surprised at his stern appearance. "Well, you're invited to celebrate my first positive response. I hope it's the last one on my resume." "He invited them," gladly replied Adriana, looking at her friend. "I don't have time today." Perhaps Kathy realized that the young people were in the midst of a relationship, or perhaps she really didn't have time for them. "But are you coming or not?" Michael was looking at Adriana. "Of course I'm going." She smiled guiltily, turned to Kathy. She went into the apartment briefly and came out to the young man. "Where shall we go?" he ventured, taking her hand. She shrugged her shoulders. "Don't be shy. Tell me." He himself did not understand why he liked this girl. But now, when they were standing next to each other, he realized that this was probably his future wife. They came to one of the cafes of the city, sat at a table. Michael ordered fruit and wine, some appetizers. "Tell me, do you have a dream?" Michael asked the girl. "I don't know." "Why?" He didn't understand. I used to think that the most important thing was to find a man, get married, have children. And when I went to school, I realized that it's not so important, she sighed. That's interesting. Michael sat down next to the girl. It's just that in the countryside everything is easy, she said. But in the city, what's in the city? Don't you get it, Michael? He doesn't know. But it seemed to him that if you're determined and you want to achieve something, you have to go for it. But you need a good job here with a profession like mine. It might not work out, sadly said Adriana. That's exactly what a good husband is for, to provide for you while you stay at home, he told her. How sneaky are you? She laughed. Why, is everything as it should be? The man earns the money and the woman finds a use for it. The young man muttered. And if a woman wants more than what he makes, she squinted. He stared absent-mindedly at her. I don't get it. No, you don't think anything. It's just that some women don't want kids. They want a fur coat, travel, expensive phones, she laughed. Oh yeah, that happens too. They continued to sit together. Everything was fine, but the day was coming to an end. They needed to head home. I'll see you again, Michael asked. If you suggested it, of course. I didn't want to keep anything from him. Adriana. I offer, of course, he told her. Paid the bill, and they walked towards the exit. Like yesterday, today they walked together because Adriana was still visiting Kathy. He walked her to her apartment. So, see you tomorrow. Yeah, let's see you tomorrow. She was about to go in. He pulled her to him and kissed her. Michael, did I like you so much? I couldn't help myself. He told her the truth. Well, I'll see you tomorrow. Auntie's gonna be worried. She sent him a kiss. Michael was very happy. First of all, he got his dream job today. Secondly, he'd met a wonderful girl. And thirdly, even if things weren't as rosy as he'd hoped, but sometimes you get triple the payoff for what you lose. The next day, he heard the elevator leaving. He figured Adriana and Kathy must have gone to school. It wasn't close for them to get there, so they had to get off early. He got ready, checked his briefcase, and only then went to work. He was well received by the staff. Now it remained only to get a foothold on this place to enter the university, and then it will be further seen. Michael did everything for this. He had a goal, and he was working towards it. Hi. He saw his girlfriends from afar. Do you still live here? He asked Adriana. I decided to spend one more night, and tomorrow I'll go to the dorm, she answered. You know, if you don't want to go to the dorm, just get your stuff out of there and move in with me, he told her. Michael, I can't do that, she replied. What's the big deal? If you don't want to, no one will bother you. Just live in peace, please. At least I'll know you're there for me. Safe and sound. He was speaking from the heart. Well, if that's really true, I guess I'll go along with it. Adriana looked at Kathy again. The next day, she drove to the technical school, then checked into the dorm. All that was left was to pack her things, to wait for Michael to come to pick her up in the evening. It was very pleasant. In Adriana's life, it was the first young man with whom she was so close, and she really liked him. But here was my apartment. He led her into the hallway. Wow, she looked it. Oh, don't mind me. It's my parents' apartment. They died when I was still in high school, and then when I got here. I moved here. I see, she smiled. What did you think of yourself just now? Wow, I'm so lucky. Finding a man and getting an apartment. He laughed. If you keep talking like that, I probably didn't move in with you, Adriana replied. That's it. Calm down. Everything will be fine. He came up to her, helped her through with her things. And presently, they entered the small room where Adriana was to live. Are you doing so well here? It's just like everyone else's. Come on. I've done practically nothing. Just a little redecorating. That's all I got to show for it. Even that was enough, she said. Now Adriana lived in the room, Michael in the hall. Naturally, they often crossed paths. The girl cooked. Met the young man with hot dishes, Kathy often came home to see her. Everything seemed to be going well. When the girls' studies were coming to an end, Michael decided to offer his girlfriend to stay with him. Neither did I understand Kathy. What's the big deal? Adriana's your friend. I'm your friend. Why wouldn't you be? I don't know. I'm kind of uncomfortable, the girl said, looking at her friend. What's uncomfortable about it? It's fine. We're with Michael. She took his hand together. And you will live in a small room, at least for the first time, until you get a job. You know, I don't think I'd say no to that. First of all, I don't have to carry my stuff all the way out there. Secondly, I didn't know you were a couple, but I was pretty sure you were. Kathy was happy. After graduation, the girls went to look for jobs. Why would you do that? I didn't understand. Michael, you don't understand. I have to get a job. Why did I study then? And what did you study for? He held out his hand for them to hand him their diplomas. He saw that the girls were cooks. They gave him what he wanted. You know, I have a friend who works at a company, and they need workers in the canteen all the time. Will you come? He asked them. If it's okay, yes, they didn't refuse. So now I call them. He sets a time and you go there. He said to the girls, Michael. Adriana ran up to him and started kissing him. Okay, don't get sentimental. Go first, in case he doesn't like something. The young man said sternly, but there was nothing in the girls that could not like. In a few days, they passed all the tests and started working in the canteen. Everything was fine. Michael did not feel any discomfort from having two girls living with him. On the contrary, he liked that his house was always cleaned and cooked by Adriana. Will you marry me? One day he asked the girl. Is that a proposal? She looked at him. At that moment they were lying in bed, getting ready for sleep. Can you consider it a proposal? But since it was, she was silent, raised her eyes to the ceiling. Why are you silent? Was he puzzled? No, of course not. I love you. She put her arms around him and started kissing him. So if you agree, we'll set the table tomorrow, and I'll invite a coworker. We'll sit and chat, Michael said to Adriana. Adriana was so happy inside that she couldn't explain it. Michael, where are we getting married? Adriana asked. The next day on his phone. Well, I don't even know. My wife and her best friend work at a huge caterer. So where are we gonna play? I don't know. He was joking again. I got it, she said into the phone. She immediately told her friend. She was very happy for her. You're lucky, Adriana. What kind of man did you get? Does he do everything for you? Kathy sighed when she heard that. Well, don't be jealous. You'll find one too. I didn't want to talk about it. Adriana. Where's the girl waving her hand and sighing? Everyone needs to start getting ready. The bride-to-be was very worried that it wouldn't work out. She first decided to write everything in a notebook. She opened the first sheet, put the number 1. Of course, under that number was the dress. Then 2. That was the restaurant where the banquet would be held. Then she gnawed on the tip of her pen and thought, why this point at all? After all, everything has already been decided. Crossed it out. So she began to think about what to write about the numbers 2. Guest, so you have to write about the invitation. What do you write there? Kathy asked her. I don't know. I just wanted to have a clear plan. And my head's a mess. She looked at her friend. Come on, she sat down next to her. They actually wrote a little plan of action as they turned the page. They started listing the guests they would invite to the wedding. Wow. Adriana looked at the list. Do you think Michael won't approve? Asked her friend then. I don't know. Adriana shrugged, even though she believed she was loved and did everything for her. After all, a wedding is once and for a lifetime. When practically everything was scheduled, the girls heard the front doors slam. It was Michael coming home from work. He went into the kitchen, saw the two girlfriends writing something about solving impossible problems. He joked. Look what we wrote. Adriana handed him a notebook. Great. He ran his eyes over the lines. Are you the best? She stood up and hugged her husband-to-be. Kathy was so happy for her friend that she just kept quiet. She didn't say anything for fear of jinxing it. On the weekend, the girls went to see the dress. Michael gave money, kissed her on the cheek, and told Adriana to buy what she liked. "Thank you, sweetheart." She realized how much she loved this man. Choosing a dress was not as easy as they had imagined it would be. Adriana had always trusted her inner voice. When she wore the first dress, she liked it so much that she didn't want to try on another. But Kathy talked her into it. "You what? One isn't a choice. What if the other one is better?" She said that a few times. In the end, Adriana tried on so many dresses, but bought the first one anyway. "I can just imagine how beautiful you're going to be." They left the store and walked down the street. "Do you know how helpful you are? I don't even know how to thank you." Adriana turned around. "Let's have a party tonight," suggested the girlfriend. "Why not?" Adriana didn't object. At first they wanted to do everything at home, because the girls knew how to cook very well. Then they talked together and decided that it would be better to sit in a cafe. They decided not to invite anyone, just the three of them. They always got together like that when they wanted to have a little fun. The girls got dressed up. They waited for Michael to come home. And when he came home, "Did you tell him everything? Did you book a table at the cafe?" Michael asked. "Why do you think everything will be busy?" Adriana was surprised. "Who knows? We should do it just in case." He was thoughtful. "All right, I'll call you now." Went Kathy to the phone. Tonight was a very positive evening. Friends were sitting around the table, talking, discussing some of the aspects of the wedding, planning what they were going to do next. "I should probably look for an apartment." "I didn't ask," Kathy stated a fact. "Why are you running ahead of the train? No one's chasing you. We'll see. Everything will be fine." "Don't get upset," Michael said. "Exactly, Auntie. Wait." A little supported the future husband, Adriana. Today they were coming home. They were laughing, joking. And when they got there, they realized how tired everyone was. And tomorrow they had to go to work. But Kathy said goodnight to the couple and went to her room. "Come on," Michael said goodnight to you too. And they went to their room too. Everything was going great. There were no excesses. Everyone was getting ready for the upcoming wedding. Adriana and Kathy continued to work, but at the same time they were doing everything they could to make it great. "Kathy, look at the shoes." Adriana showed her friend in the store window the shoes she liked. "Yes, they are beautiful, but look how much they cost." The girl was telling her, "You don't think it's even worth talking about them, Michael." Adriana looked at her. "I don't. If you want to, you can. What if something comes over him? And he'll approve. Of course, if they were black or brown, you could go out with them. But with white ones," Adriana was silent. She wanted those shoes so badly. They came home and started cooking dinner. Everything was the same as always. In the evening, Michael came, and they all sat down at the table. And as they started to eat, Kathy looked at Michael. "I know the politician saw those shoes today. They're amazing. But they cost the same," Kathy said. At that moment, Adriana froze too. She had already decided that she would not say anything to Michael. Firstly, because she knew he would agree to her every whim. And secondly, they cost so much. And soon it would be their joint budget. Why didn't she say anything to me? And why didn't she say anything? Michael turned to his bride-to-be. "I wouldn't mind having such shoes, but I realized that it would be a big hole in our budget." She began to justify herself. "I don't want to hear anything. I want my wife to be the most beautiful." Michael told her, "Maybe we shouldn't do it after all." Adriana looked at Kathy at that moment. Somewhere in the back of her mind, she was accusing her of having spoken out. "So tomorrow, you and Kathy go to the store together after work and buy these shoes. Put Michael's money on the table." "Okay, but maybe they don't fit me yet." Adriana took the money and put it in her purse. And then, when she and her friend were alone, she told her 10 more times that she was wrong to tell her about Adriana's secret. "Come on. What are you, a friend? I knew right away you weren't gonna say anything. The shoes are really nice, Kathy smiled. Finally, the celebration came. Beautiful dress, shoes, though the bride was dazzling. Next to Kathy's girlfriend, who looked every bit as good. The groom in all black stood looking at his beloved. At the registry office, they exchanged rings, said to each other, yes, what they had waited so long for had taken place. But that's it. You're not going anywhere from me now. Michael pulled her to him and kissed her hard. Adriana was also very happy. She felt in her gut that this man was her destiny. Now they also continued to live together as a threesome. Until now, it didn't bother anyone. And then Kathy herself began to realize what was superfluous in this apartment. She started looking for a place of her own. Kathy, do you want to leave us? Adriana asked her one day. What am I supposed to do with you guys here? I feel like I'm torturing you. She was telling the truth. I don't know. I think you are. Adriana answered without embarrassment. She was so comfortable having her best friend around. Together, they walked to and from work. There was just one thing. Adriana was already married, and Kathy didn't even have a friend. But one didn't say anything about it, and the other didn't think anything of it. Michael, do you know anyone you might know? Maybe we could introduce Kathy to someone. Did Adriana ask you once at dinner? You know, there's no one, he said. That's too bad. Adriana smiled and looked at Kathy. Why did you tell him that? A friend was talking tonight. What if he had made a good friend? We could have introduced you. Maybe something would have worked out. Adriana told her, you know what? I'll find my own man, said Kathy. One day they were at work, and a younger man came into the cafeteria. He came up to the serving counter, taking a long look at something. Kathy noticed it and went over to him. Can I help you? She asked. Yeah, you know, I was driving by, so I thought I'd stop. I'd never eaten in a place like this before, but I couldn't take it anymore. He looked at her, smiled. Wrinkles immediately bled all over his face. Sure, let's have the first one. She walked over to a large tank in which there was soup. And what do you have for the first borscht? Solnik. She waited for his decision. Okay, let's, since the Solnik agreed the man. The girl poured him a deep bowl of soup, then offered him the second. He refused the side dish, took only the meat, and then put the compote on the tray, paid and went to the table. Kathy saw that he had forgotten his cutlery and napkins. She took them and went to him. You didn't thank you. You are very kind and helpful. The girl, replied the guest. Kathy smiled and went to her workplace. The guest ate, and after turning in the dishes, went over to Kathy to thank her again. Not a week later, the man was back in the dining room. Now he came not just for fun, but in a strict suit and with flowers. He smiled and looked at Kathy. Hello, it was you driving by again. She walked up to him. No, beautiful. I've come to see you. My name is David. I'd like to know your name. He asked her. My name is Kathy, she answered, and she was very shy. Because all the canteen workers came out to see this concert. She looked back at those who were watching it. Her cheeks were aching. She thanked the man, took the bouquet, and stood there not knowing what to do next. Why are you so shy, child? Don't be. Tonight I invite you to the restaurant to get to know each other better. He touched her shoulder. Thank you. I will definitely be there, she replied, and saw Adriana walking towards her. Hello, David greeted her. Good afternoon, she replied. After that, Kathy introduced them to each other once more, and that was the end of it. Kathy, you see, I told you that everything will be fine in your life. Look at the man paying attention. The girl said, and looked in that direction, where David had just gone. Adriana, he's twice my age. Kathy was looking at her. So what? He's a solid man, not some guy from the diner. Adriana didn't understand her. Yeah, he took me to a restaurant tonight. Kathy looked at the flowers again. Well, go and don't even think about it. The girl was happy for her friend. As they walked home, they only discussed what Kathy would wear on their date tonight. "Remember the blue dress?" Adriana said. "Yeah, but it's really short. Do you think it would be okay if I wore it?" Kathy said, and turned to her friend. "Of course it's okay. You look really cute in it." They spent the rest of the drive discussing the rest of the accessories. When they got home, Kathy immediately took a shower and went to change. Now that she was ready, the girl really did look like candy. While in the hallway putting on her shoes, Michael walked in. "Wow, you look beautiful," Michael said. "Don't flatter me." Kathy lowered her eyes. "How flattering is that?" "It's really true." He took Adriana's hand and drew her to him. They stood and watched as the girlfriend left the apartment. "Now tell me," he smiled. "Wait, come on. Go wash your hands. We'll have dinner. I'll tell you everything there." She sent him into the bath. When they were in the kitchen, Adriana told her husband everything. Not to say that he experienced any happy emotions, but he was happy for his wife's friend that everything had worked out so well. She had nothing to worry about right now. If David really liked her, then really everything would be fine. At this time, Kathy had already arrived at the restaurant. She immediately noticed David, who got up from the table and went to meet her. He had a bouquet of flowers in his hands again. "Hello, beautiful," he said to her. He kissed her on the cheek, took her hand, and led her to the table. They sat across from each other. David had already ordered, so now he filled the glasses and raised his own to drink to the girl. "Please, please, don't be shy. If you don't like something, tell her right away," he asked her. "No, it's fine." They clinked glasses, bought some champagne, and started eating. "Do you like it?" David asked her. When Kathy tasted a piece of crab and its meat, "Yes, thank you very much. It melts in your mouth," she smiled. David realized that the girl worked as a chef, so she must know a lot about food. I really wanted to please her tonight. The evening went great. They talked for a long time, and then David left his car and went to see the girl on foot. It was cool outside. They walked and talked about different things. When they were almost there, David stopped the girl and asked her if she would agree to meet him again tomorrow. Of course, she smiled for the hours they had spent together. It seemed to her that they had known each other for more than a day, and his age was not as noticeable now as it had been at first. "But I'll come and get you tomorrow. May I?" he asked her again. Of course, she answered seriously, but inside she was jubilant, as if some little child was happy that he had been bought a new toy or something. She walked into the apartment and saw that the door to Michael and Adriana's room was already closed. She didn't bother them, went to her room, and went over in her mind what they had talked to David about today. She decided for herself that now she would talk to this man. And if he was really as nice as she had originally thought, she would probably stay with him. Naturally, in the morning, when they woke up and went to work together with Adriana, the girlfriend had 1,000 questions that when and how Kathy told her everything, and about the fact that today they have a meeting again. The girl was glad that her friend had found a man for herself. In the evening, David did indeed, as promised, pick up Kathy. They just drove around the night city. He showed her around, told her what to do and how to do it. And over the weekend, he invited her to come to his house. "David, can I come?" Not alone, but with friends, she asked him, because on some level she was afraid. But at the same time it was uncomfortable that he invited her alone, and she would come with someone else. "Sure, we'll sit, have a drink together, get to know each other," he agreed. When Kathy was home, she had already informed everyone about it. And on Saturday, the friends drove to the address that David had left Kathy. Wow! Adriana got out of the car and saw the huge house they had been brought to. Kathy didn't know anything either. She stood there with her mouth open looking at all this wealth. "So what are you standing here for? Come on in." David came out to meet them. Everyone went into the house. David met Michael. The table was already set. They sat down and started talking about different things. The company was very cordial today. No one was judging anyone. No one was jealous of anyone. Everything was going great. From that point on, Michael and Adriana, David and Kathy all began to socialize together. They would gather at David's house very often because it was outside of town, and it was very convenient. By New Year's Eve, David got tired of Kathy coming to him as guests, so he asked her to move in with him. I don't even know. Inside she was both happy and confused, but in the end she agreed. And they celebrated the most important holiday together. Michael and Adriana were left to live together. And the girl began to think that perhaps it is time for them to think about a child. The man was not against it at all. He loved children and wanted them just at first. Kathy was together with them. He was building a career. His wife was building a career. And since she didn't talk about it, he thought as it worked out, it worked out. David and Kathy. After they started living together, they didn't wait long and formalize their relationship. They didn't want to have a big wedding. They just called some friends and sat together in a restaurant. Adriana was happy for her friend. They continued to see each other on weekends. Soon her friend told Adriana that she was quitting her job. It was David's decision. How is your relationship? Adriana asked her because she was curious. You know, I can see that he treats me very well, but I feel like he just wanted a wife, Kathy said. So he has an au pair. Adriana was surprised. Yes, he does. But now we're traveling to different events. He dresses me from head to toe, introduces me to everyone. I think he does it to make other men jealous that he has such a young wife, Kathy said. Sad. Why so sad, friend? It's good when other men pay attention, and David will love you more for it. She didn't understand the girl's regrets. You know, I'm glad that David asked me to marry him, and that I'm living in his house now. We're good, but there's nothing inside. Yeah, he's cute. That's all there is, Kathy said sadly. 2 years went by like that. Sometimes, when Adriana called Michael to visit Kathy, he refused because David was not at home at that moment. But his wife would persuade him, and he would go. And David wouldn't say anything about us spending time all together. He'd ask a lot. Michael, you're standing with him, aren't you? It's okay, Kathy reassured him, because she knew David never minded. When friends came to visit, one day when Adriana came home from work, and her husband wasn't there yet, she felt sick to her stomach. Since this morning, she had felt as if she had poisoned herself. She felt dizzy. She even took her temperature a couple times, but it was nothing like that. When David came home, she told him about it. Adriana, do you think you're expecting a baby? Have you looked at her? You know, I didn't even think about it, his wife told him. I mean, it's been so long and still no pregnancy. And now that it's happening, she didn't think about it. Do you want me to run to the drugstore right now? Michael asked her, if you don't mind. At this point, she felt sick again. She went to the kitchen and drank some water. When Adriana returned to the hallway, she saw that Michael was gone. And a few minutes later, he was standing in the hallway already with a box in his hands. Here, go check one today. If it doesn't show anything, you do the same. Tomorrow morning, he put everything in her hands. Adriana went to the bathroom. When the test was ready, the 2 red stripes glowed as if it was a magic wand and not a pregnancy test. She came out of the restroom, showed everything to Michael. He was very happy at that moment. It had been 5 years since the wedding. And now that they were pretty sure they were having a baby, they were both happy. The next day on her lunch break, Adriana excused herself from work and drove to the hospital. She wanted to make sure that this was indeed the case. After examination, the doctor confirmed that Adriana was indeed expecting a baby, but warned her that her body was very weak and she needed to take great care of her health. Of course, I will do everything. After all, we have been waiting for this miracle for so long, Adriana said at the time. The first thing she did was to call Kathy. Are you expecting a baby? She answered her. Yeah, aren't you excited? Adriana couldn't understand why her friend sounded like that. "I don't even know what to tell you," she replied and hung up. Strange. Adriana looked at the phone, put it in her bag, and went back to work to finish the day. In the evening, she told Michael everything, both about the baby and the fact that she had acted strangely. "We need to go to her to support her," her husband said then. "Well, if you insist, we can go." Adriana agreed with him. Today, the three of them sat together again. David was delayed somewhere. Kathy was annoyed. She kept saying things about David, about Michael, comparing them. Adriana didn't understand what was going on with her friend when they went home. Adriana was silent at first and then turned to Michael. "Have you noticed something going on with Kathy?" she asked him. "Yes." He wouldn't say anything. "That's all." Surprised his wife. "Perhaps she's having those days of yours," nodded the man's head. "Well, yes, perhaps," Adriana agreed with him. She walked to work very carefully now. Michael often drove her. Her stomach often ached, and she felt dizzy. So Adriana went to the doctors now and then. When she was 3 months pregnant, the doctor suggested she go into labor. "Oh, really?" "No, I won't go to the hospital. At home, everything is calm. At work, too," she told the doctor calmly. "Do you realize that you could lose the baby at any moment?" That's what the doctor said to her. "Okay, let's make a deal. If I get worse, I will come right away and stay here with you." So Adriana compromised. So they made a deal. And Adriana went home. When she entered the apartment, she saw Kathy's shoes in the hallway. "Hey, what are you doing here?" She came into the kitchen. "Why can't I come over to my friend's house?" She asked her overnight. "Why can't you?" "Yes, you can. I'll make some tea and we'll sit down," Adriana said. They sat in the kitchen. The apartment was silent. Adriana was surprised that Michael didn't come out to see them. She hadn't realized he wasn't even home. Michael left. Kathy told her when she realized she was expecting him to come into the kitchen. "Gone how?" "Gone where?" Adriana didn't understand the store. "I don't know. You should know better. You're the one living with him." Kathy sat there twirling a teaspoon in her hands. "I don't get it. I'm going to call them." She took out her cell phone and started dialing her husband's number. But he didn't answer. "What if he has a mistress?" Kathy asked her friend. "What are you talking about?" "What mistress?" "We're about to have a baby." She touched her stomach. "Why? Is he always working late? What does he tell you? And you believe everything." "It's good for him to go to his mistress. The wife believes it." Her friend kept talking. "Kathy, shut up." Adriana asked her. "All right. It's my business to warn," she said. She got up and walked towards the exit. "Did you come here on purpose to tell me all this?" Adriana looked after her. "Come on, calm down. You have a nice family. Everything will be fine for now." And she left the apartment. Adriana went back to the kitchen. She took out her phone again and dialed Michael again. She couldn't understand what had happened. She was so worried that her blood pressure had gone up. And after another hour, she started bleeding. The girl called an ambulance. The paramedics came and took her away. When she was already in the hospital, I realized that something terrible had happened. The doctor came into the room. He approached Adriana, took her hand. "What's wrong with the baby?" she asked. The doctor shook his head negatively. "I told you that you should stay with us. Why didn't you listen to me?" He squeezed her hand, stood up, and turned away. "Don't tell me." She was silent, and then she started to cry. "Don't be upset. You're still young. You'll be fine," he told her. "But why did it happen to me?" Adriana squeezed her eyes shut. Tears were flowing from her eyes, so that it was impossible to stop them. "Did you call your husband?" he asked her. "Yes, but he didn't answer for some reason." Adriana continued to cry. "Well, stay here. You need to rest. And then make sure you call him again." The doctor left the room. Adriana was alone. She didn't know what to think. What if something had happened to Michael? What if he was in an accident? What if he'd been hit by a car? Where could he have gone tonight? Until the morning, the girl didn't close her eyes. She just couldn't sleep. And in the morning, her husband called her. "Where are you? What's wrong with you?" He spoke excitedly. "Michael, where have you been?" She asked him in a stricken voice. "Tell me where you are, and I'll come and tell you everything." Worried, he said, "I'm at the hospital. Our baby is gone," she replied, in a very sad voice. "I'm on my way." He hung up the phone. When Michael arrived at Adriana's house, he told her that when Kathy arrived, she told him about David needing help to go, how not to help a friend. He dropped everything and went to David's. There was really a lot to do there. His phone was still in his bag, and he dialed her as soon as he'd arrived. It made sense, Adriana said, because she didn't care much about Michael's whereabouts right now. Their baby just wasn't there. Michael sat beside his wife. He didn't know what to say, what to do. There was only one thought running through his mind: regret that he wasn't home. It made the bullet so upset. He tried to speak some soothing words to her, but the woman was unsuccessful. Tears rolled from her eyes. There was no point in saying anything. "I will need to go to David and Kathy again tonight," Michael told her. "I don't want to hear that name again. Do you hear me?" She punched him in the chest with her fist. "What's wrong?" He didn't understand anything. "Michael, I may not be able to get pregnant again. This pregnancy was an accident, and the next one is not a sure thing." She was telling him. "What are you talking about? Of course it'll work out." Couldn't calm down, Michael. "Okay, we'll see," she said, and wiped away a tear that had slipped traitorously down her cheek. "When can you go home?" her husband asked her. "I don't know. The doctor said I'm feeling better now. I guess we can go," Adriana said. They drove home in silence. They didn't feel like talking at all. Michael blamed himself for everything. Adriana fought back about the lost baby. When they were already home, Adriana just went to the bedroom, lay down on the bed, turned her back to the wall, and lay like that for a long time. There were so many thoughts in her head that she couldn't do anything. "Sweetheart, take a pill." Michael came into the room. "I don't want any pills." Without turning around himself, said Anna. He realized that their life was divided into before and after. He had always been a decent family man, coming home, helping his wife. And this happened here. "Tell me, why? Why did she stay here?" "To wait for me, to bring me home. She told me about your mistresses, something else." "What's it all about?" Adriana turned to her husband. She was screaming and waving her arms. "I don't know." He put his hands to his chest. You don't know? Then I'll find out." At this point, she became very dizzy and sat down on the bed. Michael sighed heavily. He went to the kitchen. He realized he was annoying his wife with his presence, and for about a month the couple just did not speak. Adriana knew that her husband went to David, helped them, but she could not even think about it, because in her head there was only one time. Kathy had told her about it. So she knows something. So she's seen something. What if they're all meeting together? But calling her friend was the one thing she didn't want to call. She blamed her for what had happened to her. It's been a year. Nothing in Adriana and Michael's relationship had changed. Just as they had grown distant from each other, they couldn't get any closer. She didn't trust him. "Adriana, don't you think we should change things up?" Somehow Michael sat down next to her. What exactly was she looking at him for? "We used to be so good together," and now he stopped talking and looked at her. "Do you know what Kathy told me about you?" Adriana finally decided to have this conversation. "What did she tell you? Was it interesting, Michael, that you had a mistress?" She spoke quickly, because she didn't want to bring it up again. "Adriana, and you believe it?" he wondered. "Why wouldn't I?" She lowered her eyes and did not look at her husband. "What a mistress! You're the love of my life. I met you and realized that you would be my wife. And now, no matter what anyone offers me, I will never trade you for anyone else." He hugged her. "Adriana," She missed her husband's caresses so much that she buried herself in his chest and cried. "It's true," she said through her sobs. "Of course it's true." He pulled her tighter against him. From that moment on, life in the family began to get better. Although Adriana knew that Michael was still communicating with David, and she did not tell him anything about it, a few more years passed. At some point, Adriana's cell phone rang. She looked at the screen and saw an unfamiliar number. "Hello," she answered the phone. "Adriana, please come over." She heard Kathy's voice. "Why?" Immediately, she changed from grace to anger. David was dead. Her best friend had once told her. What had happened? Adriana really didn't understand. Yes, David was a man of age, but not old enough to die. "I don't know. The hospital called me, told me to come over." Kathy was crying into the phone. "Hang on, I'll be right there," Adriana said and hung up. Just for a second. She thought about whether to do it or not, but being responsive to people trumped everything else. So she drove to her girlfriend's house. It turned out that as David was driving to work, a car pulled into the oncoming lane. He swerved the steering wheel. The car flipped a couple times, and when the emergency services arrived, all they had to do was record the time and date of death. "What a horror," Adriana said. "How happy were we with him?" So many years of sitting and rereading Kathy. Adriana, though, still hadn't forgiven her, but now she sat and comforted Kathy. Everything would be all right. "You'll see," she told her. And then there was the funeral. Michael helped with everything, never left Kathy's side. Even afterwards, when they got home, he told Adriana to go and see Kathy, to see how she was feeling. "Did you go with me to see your wife?" "No, go alone," she told him. Now Adriana had her own friends, her own interests, different company. She hadn't socialized with Kathy, and she didn't want to now. Every weekend, Michael would pack up, drive to his friend's house. He'd do the bath. He'd fix the gate. Every time he had something to do to help the girl. "Let's celebrate New Year's Eve together, like old times." One day, Michael suggested to his wife, "Michael, enough already." She asked him, "What did I say?" The man didn't understand. "You realize that because of this person I lost a child, and I will never have children again. Why do you want me to start talking to her again?" Adriana didn't understand. "Adriana, life goes on. Things change. You have to be kinder and forgive people." He wanted to cheer her up somehow. "I don't want to forgive anyone. Why hasn't she called or written in all these years? Why was she so cruel that night? Why did she say all those things to me?" She started twiddling her thumbs and listing. "Adriana, why did you believe all that? You should have believed me, not her." Michael lost his temper too. "Go to your Kathy and celebrate New Year's Eve with her." His wife was mad at him. "Okay, everybody, we have to stop. We're gonna have another fight." Michael took control of the situation. Right after New Year's Eve, Michael said he had to go to work, that everyone is on vacation and you will work. His wife didn't understand. "I promise, I'll make a couple calls, sign some papers, and go straight home." He told her, "Okay, let's just keep it short." She kissed him goodbye, and he left the apartment. Adriana went to the kitchen. She was preparing dinner, waiting for her husband's imminent return, but everything was already ready. Michael was still gone. She sat on a chair looking out the window. It was snowing in big flakes. Adriana began to remember how they had met Michael, how things had started for them. She smiled. It was starting to get dark outside, and her husband was still gone. Adriana cleared everything off the table, turned off the light in the kitchen, and went to her room. She turned on the TV. A movie was playing, but the woman couldn't concentrate on the plot. She kept thinking, where could her husband be? She kept thinking that maybe something had happened to him, but then she would probably get a call from the hospital. And then suddenly one terrible thought came into her head. What if he had gone to his mistress? Wouldn't he? Today is January 1st. Yesterday he spent the whole day with her. They congratulated each other, and today he should congratulate her. Adriana began to think to herself. She screwed herself up so much that she just turned off the TV. Light went to the bedroom and went to bed thinking about what her husband was doing wrong. She woke up in the morning, saw that her husband wasn't around. He smirked. "Oh well, she's got you so well drawn to her that you don't even come home anymore," she said out loud. She didn't want to think about Michael anymore. She went to the kitchen and made herself some coffee. As she sat at the table and drank it, various thoughts came into her head. Even though she didn't want to think about Michael, she couldn't do it. That was fine. But she was also talking to her lover to herself as she went to the bathroom and decided to start the laundry. Adriana sorted out the dirty laundry, put something in the machine, something left for later, because you cannot wash white color together. Started the machine. I went to my room, sat on the couch and decided to call my husband's partner to ask if he really had to go to work yesterday. "Hello, Sam, hi." She started to speak when Adriana answered on the other end. "Hello." He was surprised by her call. "Listen, did Michael have to go to work yesterday?" she asked him. "Yes. They sent us new contracts before the new year. He had to sign them. He didn't have any other work." "Why did something happen?" he asked. "No, nothing's wrong. I just wanted to see if my husband was cheating on me," said Adriana. She hung up the phone, and at that moment she realized that Michael was not cheating on her. But where could he be now? Here Adriana started to get nervous. She got up, went to her room. Her wife didn't know what she wanted there. But at some point, when she was going through the papers, she saw her husband's passport. "I don't understand." She opened it. He'd gone to work without papers, without everything. I guess he really only had to sign something. It was no fun now. She dialed one hospital, another. But the man she was looking for was nowhere to be found. It was late in the evening. So Adriana decided to dial Sam again. "Sam, I'm sorry to bother you again. But you know, Michael left for work yesterday. He said he wouldn't be long. And it's been 2 days, and he's still not here," she told him. "Like he hasn't been in touch with me," the man mumbled. "What do you think I should do?" "Go to the police." She asked him for advice. "You know, I'm not an advisor in this case, but I think it's worth a try. You're the wife, after all," the man told her. Adriana hung up. She still hoped that Michael would come back and decided to wait until morning before calling or doing anything else. But when it was morning and Michael was still not home, she did not think about anything. The woman gathered her papers, his papers, drank her coffee, got dressed, and went straight to the police station. On the way, she began to think that what if he is now at the mistress? What if he is somewhere else? And she as a fool will come and start to tell that her husband is missing, and he will be found in 2 days, and that she will be laughed at. Had she stopped? "No, I'm not going anywhere," she told herself. But in another moment she thought, what if something really happened to him, and she did nothing now? What would they say later? She moved on. She was admitted to the station. The investigator listened to her, handed her a paper to write a statement. When, with whom, to where, what he looked like. It all had to be written. There Adriana diligently wrote out the letters while her mind was again filled with thoughts. The application was accepted. They promised to do a search right away. But no matter how many times Adriana called the department, they couldn't tell her anything. Michael was now neither dead nor alive. He couldn't be found just anywhere. What am I supposed to do? She closed her eyes with her hands. The woman sighed deeply. It had been 6 days since we had been away from home. The phone lay in front of her. It was silent. Adriana stared at it for a long time. Then she picked it up and decided to dial Kathy's number. "Hello, Adriana." "Hi. What's up?" She heard the greeting on the phone. "Kathy, do you know what happened?" Adriana was silent. A lump rose in her throat because now she knew she was going to cry. She couldn't continue the conversation. "Well, talk. I'm listening." Kathy got worried on the other end of the line. "Michael is missing," she said to her. Missing. Gone where? Her friend started asking questions. That's the thing. I don't know where he's gone. At first I thought he was with his mistress, but then I realized he would have let me know anyway, said he was leaving or something. And then I went and filed a police report, but they couldn't do anything either. Can you believe it? On the morning of January 1st, he just left for work and never came back. The woman spoke through her sobs. Yes, how can that be? Michael is a grown man. If something had happened to him, had he been in an accident or just died, you would have been notified, Kathy said. I'm sure I'm sorry I called you. I just didn't know what to do, Adriana told her. So wait for me at home and I'll be right over. Kathy hung up, and Adriana thought she should let her come over. It would be easier with the two of them than alone. Kathy was at her place an hour and a half later. They sat in the kitchen, both of them silent, drinking tea, no conversation flowing. Then Adriana told Kathy to go home. They weren't going to solve anything anyway. Well, don't worry. I hope they find your Michael. It's not the 90s. There's no racketeering. No one's moving anyone out. Kathy headed for the exit. She looked at Adriana and left the apartment. Adriana was lying in bed, but there was no sleep. Then she thought since the police couldn't handle this case, she should hire a private investigator. She had the money, so there would be no problem with that. She found a man in the classifieds who could do it. She arranged to meet him at a cafe. Hello, tell me what happened. They were sitting at a table. The man had a notebook in front of him and was ready to take notes. Adriana told him everything she knew. All she knew was that her husband had gone to work and never came home. Are you sure he hasn't found someone else? The detective asked her. You know, I think if he had someone, at least he came for his things. Well, he'd definitely come back for his passport. Adriana told him. Oh, I see. He wrote everything down, took Adriana's coordinates, put his hand on hers, and asked her not to worry. After that, she went home. There was only one thing left to do. Wait. There was nothing she could do on her own. The New Year holidays were coming to an end. She had to go to work. There was still no news. Ethan kept calling Adriana, finding out about mutual friends and girls she might have seen in pictures or something, or maybe she suspected someone herself. Kathy said everything she knew. I'm sorry, I'm going to ask you something now, but I can't not do it, he once said to Adriana. Yes, of course. Ask anything I know. I'll tell you. She was ready for it. You told me that he used to go to your ex-girlfriend Kathy's house all the time, helping her with her chores. Couldn't he go to her place now? He asked Adriana. Oh, shut up, will you? Adriana. She wanted to tell him that Michael would never do such a thing. And then she wondered why he'd gone to her every weekend after David died. What did they do there? She doesn't know that. What if they were having an affair? Kathy was always jealous of her. Said she had a good husband. Hello, Adriana, can you hear me? Ethan said. Yes, I can hear you. I'm just thinking, she replied. So, was she pondering? Was Ethan wondering? You know, when Kathy's husband died, Michael used to go to see her all the time, saying he was helping out around the house. And now, I don't even know what to tell you. She didn't want to say anything bad about her husband, but at the same time, she had her doubts. Okay, I heard you. I just needed to know if he had a reason to go there. He started to say goodbye, but it was goodbye. Waiting for news, Adriana dropped the call. And now she had something else on her mind. Could Michael have cheated on her with Kathy? Again and again, the thought came back to her mind. She thought about it, but couldn't come up with anything. A day later, Ethan called again. Adriana, can I come over? Are you at home? He asked her. Yes, of course, come over. She was glad that he had some news. Adriana put the kettle on, took out some cookies on the table. She was ready to meet the detective. He arrived, said hello. They went straight into the kitchen. But what do you have some news? Adriana didn't know what to think anymore. She called the police. They too were just throwing up their hands. She hoped to get some results here. Look, I don't know how you're gonna take this information right now, but let me talk. Listen to the end, and then we'll draw conclusions together. Ethan asked her. Yes, of course I'm listening, she told him. I asked you, Kathy, for a reason. When you said you used to socialize, you were family friends, I decided to observe her for a while. She's been acting very strangely. She hardly leaves the house, doesn't turn on the lights, even though I know she's inside. Maybe you could talk to her openly, Ethan asked her. I don't understand what you're getting at. You think Michael is living with her and they are cheating on me together, she concluded. From what the PI said, no, I'm not saying anything. I'm just very curious as to why this is happening. The detective asked a question. You see, there was an incident many years ago that made me feel very bad. After that, Kathy and I didn't speak to each other until after her husband died. And then I can't say we had the warm friendship that we used to have. And now I can't just call her up and say something like that, Adriana said. She sat there, squeezing her fingers so hard they were already red. Okay, if you're still talking to her like that, maybe you and I can go to her place, see what's going on with her and talk. Ethan talked her into it. If you know something, you can talk on the line. Tired of listening to him walk around. Yeah, around. I don't know anything yet. I'm just guessing, he told Adriana. Good. We can go to her place tonight, the woman said and poured more tea into the mugs. Great, that's what we'll do, Ethan said. They talked some more with Adriana before drinking tea, and the man headed for the exit. Thank you for taking so much of your time and for doing this. The woman spoke earnestly. Wait, thank you, nothing has happened yet. He looked at her. Adriana returned to the kitchen and began clearing the table. She kept going over the conversation with Ethan in her head. Why had he started following Kathy in the first place? Why hadn't he thought that someone in the office might be involved in Michael's disappearance? And then another crazy thought popped into Adriana's head. What if Michael was on his way home and he'd been kidnapped? That's enough of that kind of thinking, she said to herself. Adriana went to her room and turned on the TV to the channel where singers were performing. She listened to familiar songs and sang along. The woman realized that there was a disaster in her family. A man was missing. But she couldn't help it. All sorts of silly things came into her head. Finally, the evening came. Adriana was ready. All she was waiting for was for Ethan to come and pick her up. When the phone rang, she even flinched. Did you pull up? She saw his name on the screen. Yes, I'm waiting for you, he said. At that moment, Adriana turned off the lights, opened the door, and hurried downstairs. What was going to happen now? She couldn't even guess. She could only hope that it was not what Ethan and Michael thought it was. Not her friends. It was cold outside. So Adriana quickly got into the car, where the heater was working. It seems to have gone only 2 meters, and already about another put it. Let's go. Ethan turned to her. Yes, she nodded decisively. The car started up. Pleasant music was playing in the cabin. The men and women were silent. Adriana didn't think about anything now that Ethan was beside her. She knew this road like the back of her hand. They should turn right here and then take a sharp left. She and Michael had come here before. So many times, they couldn't even count. Almost there, she said. The fence of Kathy's house was already in sight. They pulled up just as Ethan had said. There were no lights in the windows, even though it was still late. Adriana had the good idea to call Kathy. Wait, don't drive. It's too close, she asked Ethan. She took out her phone and her purse and dialed her friend's number. Hello, she heard a voice. It wasn't sleepy. Hi, Adriana said calmly. Where are you now? At home. I'm a little sick. The girl's voice changed immediately. She started to sing a little. I see. And I wanted you to come to me. Annoyed, and said Adriana, I'm sorry, there is no way today. Kathy said, Okay, see you later, challenged Adriana. But what did I tell you? I saw she was home. But why doesn't she turn on the lights? Maybe she doesn't want anyone to know she's out there hinting at men again. Let's go and ask her ourselves. Adriana's about to get out of the car. We'll be right there. He stopped her. They were at the fence, got out of the car. Adriana rang the bell. Inside, no one moved. There was total silence. Or maybe she tricked me, that the woman at home turned detective. I don't think so. He showed her what? The one that had just gone down on the second floor. By opening it, I know you're home, shouted Adriana then. They stood outside the gate. It was so cold that their feet were quickly starting to freeze. Adriana started pounding on the gate, but it was having no effect. Kathy, if you don't open it now, we'll come back tomorrow. But not alone, but with the police. The man decided not to be shy either. At that moment, the light on the first floor came on. A few more minutes passed, and the lock beeped, alerting that the doors were open. A woman and a man entered. Ethan looked around. There was nothing suspicious. The front door to the house was open as well. Kathy, they walked in and stopped. She stood there looking at them. Only now she pretended she had just woken up. What's going on? She asked and yawned. No need to pretend. Where's Michael? Immediately went on the offensive. Adriana. What are you like, Michael? What are you talking about? Did not understand her friend, my Michael. You have it. Adriana. Everything was already shaking. She could not calmly watch the concert that her friend was playing out. Ever since high school, Adriana remembered how well Kathy was at playing different roles. Michael who? What are you doing breaking in on me in the middle of the night? You're threatening the police. I can call them too and tell them you broke in. My friend went on the offensive. Okay, you don't want to tell me. I'll find him. She went inside Adriana's house. She knew every corner of the place. Adriana, come on, there's no one here. Kathy looked after her, but it was useless. The woman would do anything to find her husband. Adriana went to the kitchen to the guest bedroom, then went up to the second floor. There were more rooms there, but she looked in them too. As a result, the house was glowing like a Christmas tree now, because there were lights on in all the windows. Where is he? Adriana came close to her friend. She could believe everything now. I told you he wasn't here. Kathy stood her ground. Well, then can I ask you a question? Ethan approached him. When was the last time you saw Michael? Ethan asked the lady of the house. I don't know, sometime before New Year's. Shrugged. Clearly, we're not getting anywhere here. He sat down on the couch. Adriana came over and sat down next to him. She folded her arms across her chest and began to think that what they'd done was stupid. Coming over and breaking into a man's house. Or maybe you really are sick. Did they come at her with fists? Wait. Adriana stood up suddenly from her seat and walked over to the fireplace. What was Ethan tensing up over there? Why is she the one who picked up Michael's watch from the shelf? I don't know. Kathy was getting nervous. I do. It's my husband's wristwatch. The detective looked at it. So what? He came to see me so often. He could have left it at any time. Kathy couldn't stand anymore. Did she crouch on the step? No, he couldn't have left them anywhere. Remember the day he started work? Well, that's when that watch was given to him by the manager who got him there. He never took it off. Only took it off at night. Adriana said. Her voice was shaking. I don't know. Then the girl lowered her gaze. I know everything. Adriana came very close to her. You know something, her friend averted her eyes. What are you, Michael, lovers? Adriana even choked when she said that word. Calm down. He wasn't cheating on you. Kathy exhaled and got up from the steps. Tell me what you know. Adriana wanted to hear everything. I can't. I'm scared and started crying. Kathy, it's too late to repent now. Spit it out. A woman stood over her best friend from the past. I'm so sorry, please. I didn't mean any harm. I've been jealous of you from the beginning. Maybe that's what got me into the girlfriend thing, too. Kathy continued to sob. I don't get it. Can you tell me exactly what happened? Adriana was in a stupor. What does jealousy, friendship, and everything else have to do with it? If they are now looking for a missing person, I killed Michael, Kathy said quietly. You did what? Their eyes, Adriana. I'm sorry. Kathy fell on her knees in front of Adriana. Wait, explain exactly how, when, and where. The woman asked. Ethan, meanwhile, had turned on the tape recorder. Then, when you met him and he first came for a walk with us, I immediately fell in love with him. I thought he'd look at me too, and he kept his eyes on you. Then when you two started living together and you asked me out, I thought that was lucky. But no matter how many hints I made, he never even responded. Where did this David come from out of nowhere? Yeah, I liked him. But I told him right away that you'd be coming over very often. And we started to become family friends. Even then, I never gave up trying to get Michael, Kathy said. She wasn't looking at anyone at the time. You've got to be such a head shaker, Adriana said. Then you told me you were expecting a baby. I couldn't let that happen. I thought if I told you things, you'd get nervous and miscarry. So I did. And when David died, I didn't let it go to waste. The house was in need of renovation by then. So I started looking for reasons for Michael to come visit me. Kept telling the truth. Kathy. God, how blind was I? Adriana's sitting down now, because it was hard to hear how you've been lied to practically your whole life. I'm sorry. I don't know what to do. I'm definitely going to jail now. Kathy was crying more and more. And then what happened? She didn't expect anything good anymore. A woman whose husband disappeared. Before New Year's Eve, he told me he'd ask you to reconnect and be the three of us together again. I found out later that he did, but you said no. So I asked Michael to come over and sit down with me. He said he couldn't do that either because he didn't want to ruin things with you, and you'd celebrate New Year's Eve together. I was willing to wait. And when he called on the first of the year to wish you a Happy New Year, I thought of a new job for him, and he didn't say no. He said he'd do it quickly and come to you. She looked up at Adriana at that moment. Okay. At what point did you kill him? She asked then. She thought Kathy was not right in the head. He arrived as usual. I sat him down at the table, put out some salads, poured some tea. We sat talking. At some point, Michael said he couldn't eat anymore and went to the couch. At that moment, he took off his watch because he had to go to the yard. That's when I decided to let it be. When he turned around from the fireplace, I guided his neck with my hands and wanted to kiss him. Tears flowed from her eyes with renewed vigor. Stop crying. Can you tell me what happened? Kathy was starting to piss Adriana off, especially now when she started talking about kissing. My wife's insides were even tightening. He grabbed my hands, gave me this look and pushed me away. And then he turned around and went to the door. And I flew up behind him. And I pushed him in the back with all my might. I didn't expect him to start falling. But Michael fell and bumped his head against the corner. She pointed to the marble coffee table. What and where is he now? Adriana turned pale. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to do anything wrong. It was an accident. Kathy started to yell. Ethan was sitting on the couch at that moment. He had such a drama in front of him. He was taping everything. I hope you called an ambulance. Adriana came very close to her. I checked. There was no pulse. Got really scared and dragged him out the second exit to the backyard. She looked up at her friend and fell silent. Is he still in there? Adriana pointed her finger in the direction where the exit was. Yes, Olechka, I'm sorry. I didn't know what I was doing. She followed her as she threw off her jacket and headed for the exit. Get away from me. Abruptly, she turned around. She saw Ethan following them. The woman jerked the doors open. The cold immediately hit her in the face. She stepped out here already into the snowdrift. She took a second step, but saw no one. Kathy, where is he? She shouted to the mistress of the house. It's farther behind the well. She pointed in the direction with her hand. God, I don't believe it. I don't believe it. Adriana walked through the snow and sobbed. She got to the place Kathy said she was going to, and she saw Michael's shoe. The woman crouched down and started digging it out of the snow. Because it was so cold outside, it hadn't changed much. Adriana, take this. Ethan handed her something. Everybody get away from me. She wouldn't calm down. Then Ethan went back inside. He decided to call the ambulance police so they could take it from there. After he hung up, he managed to get Adriana into the house. Kathy was drinking something at this point. Apparently, the sedative had been waiting for about an hour. After that time, everyone was already here. While the police paramedics were examining the body, Adriana sat and kept her eyes on Kathy. It seemed like she was about to get up and just tear up her now definitely ex-girlfriend to shreds. Ethan was in control of this. He knew the woman was in shock now, and in that stage, she could do anything. We're taking the bodies, and we're taking you all too. Standing in the doorway was a man in uniform. It was obvious that he was freezing. They all walked out of the house. Kathy was put in the police car, and Ethan asked that he and Adriana ride in his car. They spent 0:00 this afternoon at the station. Kathy was telling again how everything had happened, and Adriana was only confirming her words. Ethan handed over the tape he had made at Kathy's house. Okay, you're going home. We'll leave you here. He looked at Kathy. I'm sorry again. She never, the woman whispered. Ethan brought her home. He looked in the medicine cabinet for something to calm her down and dipped it into a glass of water. Adriana drank. She kicked back on the couch. There were different feelings inside. Right now, she was thinking how mean her friend had been. After all, she was at her house and making such a surprised look. When Adriana had told her about Michael disappearing and him lying in her backyard the whole time. I guess I'll just stay here and sit in the chair. Ethan, thank you, Adriana told him. She sat there, staring at one point and thinking. Unbeknownst to her, the shock or the sedative had taken its toll on her, and she fell asleep. Ethan had been watching her the whole time. But then his body couldn't take it either, and he fell asleep in the chair. Michael jumped up from Adriana's couch, startling herself and startling Ethan in the process. It's all right. Immediately a man came up to her. It's not true. She cried, remembering last night. Unfortunately, but it wasn't. The man put his arm around her waist and sat her back behind the couch. Oh my God. The man I know took all my favorite people away from me a long time ago. Adriana started crying again. Ethan went to the kitchen. He put the kettle on and dug out her sedative again. He realized that even now he could not leave Adriana alone. He went to the kitchen, made coffee, and came back with 2 steps. Here you need a drink. He set it in front of her. I don't want one. She shook her head. Good. He didn't argue with her. The time until lunch stretched very slowly, and when the phone rang in the silence, it was like a bell striking above his ear. Hello. Adriana answered the phone. Hello. Can you come over? A man's voice asked her. Yes, of course. She shifted her gaze to Ethan. He nodded his head. At the same moment, she got up from the couch and went to the front doors. The man followed her. Thank you for being there for me. I don't know how I would have done it alone. She turned to him. It's okay. Everyone needs the help of someone else, he said when they were already in the driveway. They got into the car, which Ethan walked around for a few more minutes, and only then did they drive. There was complete silence in the cabin. Everyone was thinking about their own things. When they pulled up to the station, Adriana couldn't get out of the car. Her legs felt like absorbent cotton. Ethan gave her his hand, and together they went inside. The investigators were saying something. Adriana sat and listened, but the conversation was through absorbent cotton. But one thing Adriana heard clearly. It turned out, after the examination of Michael's body at the morgue, that when Kathy carried him outside, he was still alive. Alive. The wife jumped up from her chair. Yeah, he had a severe blow to the head, but his heart was beating. Your friend. When the man said the word, he looked at Adriana as if apologizing. Couldn't have gotten a pulse. She's not a doctor. Oh my God. It gets scarier every day. Adriana became hysterical. It was clear that she wouldn't listen to anything else. And then they started interrogating her every day. Both Adriana and Ethan were called in. Until it was over. It was almost at that moment they were allowed to take the body away. They had to bury it. Don't worry, I'll make arrangements, Ethan muttered to Adriana. He himself doesn't know what it was that got him so hooked on her that he just wanted to help her. He did make arrangements with the funeral home. They did everything to the best of their ability. Adriana looked at her husband lying in the coffin and could not believe that all this was really happening. Forgive me, my love, for not believing you. She kissed him. And then there was the trial. Kathy sat in the cage. She only had eyes for Adriana, and Adriana for her. People were saying things, but the widow didn't know what was going on. She was asked something for the 100th time. She answered on automatic. When the judge left to pass sentence, Adriana turned to Ethan. "Oh, get me out of here," she asked him. "Okay, let's go." He gave her his hand. They arrived at her house again. Ethan was sitting in the same chair again. He was looking at Adriana. She moved like a robot, knew where to pick up things and where to put them. "You need to eat properly," he told her. "Do you realize what happened?" She sat down on the couch and stared at the man. With difficulty, but the picture was becoming clearer. He fell silent. "I don't know how many years she was sent to prison for, but I wish her all the pain she went through." I told Adriana, with anger in my voice. "You don't have to." "So she's human too," Ethan said. "And I'm not. She ruined my whole life." Adriana cried. "That's it. You don't have to cry anymore. It won't help anything." He patted her hand. "When was the last time you were home?" She asked the man. "The day you and I were going to go carry." He didn't finish because he thought he would make Adriana uncomfortable. "Wow. At least you ate." She looked toward the kitchen. "Well, yeah, something before Kosovo," he smiled. "And slept." Adriana began to question him. "It's okay. The main thing is that everything is the same with you." He smiled at her. "You're a real person, you know." She smiled for the first time in a while. "I cared before your case." Ethan did spend a lot of time in this apartment, but he didn't feel anything but rash and some kind of hunger. Even though Adriana asks about it, he made her porridge, sandwiches, and everything else for herself every morning. "Oh, why didn't I pay you?" She gulped, got up from the couch and started looking for her bag. "Calm down. It's nothing. I've basically done nothing. Just put you in the right frame of mind." He took her hands in his. "But it can't be like that, can it?" She sat down on the couch again. "Everything in life can be." He smiled at her. She calmed down. They continued to communicate with Ethan. Summer came. Adriana came to the cemetery every day. She sat on a bench, talking to Michael. She loved being here. "Hey, what are you doing?" Ethan called her every night. "It's okay. Come visit." She always invited him, but he rarely agreed. At first he didn't come at all, saying he was busy, but then he started coming once every week or two, and they knew almost everything about each other. "You know, I miss you so much. I'm so used to having you around," Adriana said to him. They were sitting in her kitchen. It was snowing outside the window. "If you wanted me to, I'd stay for good." He finally decided to say it. "I can't betray Michael." She shook her head. They spent New Year's Eve together, and on January 1 they drove to the cemetery together to honor Michael's memory. They stood by the grave for a short time, put flowers on it, and drove back home. "I can't believe it's been a whole year since he's been gone," Adriana said sadly. "Adriana, I'm sorry. I'm a little busy today. I'll drive you home and leave you there. I'll come back tonight, and I'll look at her." "Sure," she smiled. Adriana went up to the floor, undressed, made herself a hot tea. She sat down on the sofa, returned to the plate and took the family album in her hands. How happy were we? Adriana looked at the pictures. The album was half empty because those photos, where Kathy was, she just tore. The woman didn't realize how she'd fallen asleep. Hello. Michael came running towards her. All around was summer, warmth, grass, green apple trees. Then Adriana. Michael, how are you? Adriana looked at him. She ran up to him, touched his face, and couldn't believe he was alive. I just came to meet you. He kissed her cheeks, lips, neck, and cheek. He always did that, and she always said that. Adriana, not giving up on Ethan. He's good and he loves himself. Looked at her seriously. Michael, what are you saying? I love you. She couldn't look into his eyes. I don't. Remember me. Live with Ethan. He was looking at her very seriously. She knew that look. You've done well, she thought. She laughed. Very well. He kissed her once more and disappeared. Michael woke up Adriana. She thought the smell of his perfume still lingered in the room. At that moment, the doorbell rang. Adriana went to open it. Ethan stood on the doorstep. In his hand was a bouquet of flowers. He smiled and held out a cake to her. I'm sorry. I just woke up. That's why so much for slowing down. She took the flowers and the cake and carried everything into the kitchen. I don't know if you're going to say no or not, but I brought champagne too. He took out an empty bottle. Come in. She called him to the table. I want to drink to the most beautiful lady in this room. Ethan raised his glass. I'm smitten. She pretended to be surprised. They were talking about something. Adriana looked at Ethan and realized that she really liked him. And Michael had said, rightly, that he was a reliable man. What are you thinking about? Ethan asked her then. I was dreaming about Michael, she said, but at the same moment she thought she was about to be taken for a lunatic. And what did he say to you? It was interesting, Ethan, to make me look in your direction, she smiled. And you became even more interesting. I'm sitting here thinking, why not? There was laughter in the kitchen again. I love it when you laugh, Ethan said. He got up and walked out of the kitchen. He was gone only a few minutes. Then he came to the door, knocked on the jamb. Come in. Adriana understood his game. Hello. Can I meet you? He asked and looked Adriana straight in the eyes. Yes, my name is Adriana. And you are? I'm Ethan. What do you do? Adriana asked a new question. I'm going to ask you out tomorrow. And I think I might say yes. They had another drink. After that, they talked about everything for a long time. They sat up until nightfall. And then Ethan started to get ready to go home. As he held her hand as he walked back, at those words, her heart folded in her heart. She remembered the gruesome story again. Don't. He put his arm around her. How about you stay? She asked him, even though she knew it sounded ambiguous now. No, a decent girl doesn't act like that. He wagged his finger at her. Okay, I'll see you tomorrow. She closed the door. After that, Adriana lay down on the couch and started thinking about Ethan. Not as a good acquaintance, but as a man. They had started dating. Ethan tried to surprise her all the time, making up things, taking her on outings, and close to New Year's Eve, he proposed to her. I said yes, she whispered then. They played a wedding, at which there was almost no one. And in March, Adriana was surprised to discover she was expecting a baby. Don't even look. This baby is going to be born. Ethan wagged his finger at her. Thank you, Adriana said quietly. She knew it was Michael who had helped her get pregnant. What's there whispering? Her husband came up to her. I wasn't going to do anything, she said quietly. Adriana, I'm the luckiest man in the world. He told her. And I'm a lucky woman. She rejoiced. In the summer, when they were walking in the park, Adriana couldn't even see her legs because of her huge belly. They thought they were going to give birth to a rich man. And it was. On the doctor's due date, little Michael was born. Neither Ethan nor Adriana had any doubts about what the baby would be called. The now proud father went out to the yard every day with the stroller. He looked at his wife and could not believe how lucky he was.